That was awkward.
First time stream, and we're using a kind of horrible clutch together setup here. So if things worked
That's
perfectly, that
true.
would be amazing.
All right. So, all right. I guess we'll start off with phasers.
Yeah.
We were actually having a bit of discussion on that, anyways. So, phasers, just starting from the top, I think phasers are basically mass nadions. They have poor penetration, so in a sense, they act like a laser in that they don't get very far. So a blade of armor can vaporize quickly and make it difficult for following nadion particles to hit the target. Since there are also particle weapons, they're probably charged since the Borg appear to block them with EM shields. Cricket phaser is not really relevant here. Phaser 2, 1 to 16 settings, we don't know what their battery capacity is. I would assume it's not as good as the Phaser 3.
Well, I mean, if the Phaser 2 and Phaser 3 have identical settings, the Phaser 3 obviously has different advantages, either in superior ergonomics or superior battery
certainly
life or
superior
something.
ergonomics.
Well, I mean, it is easier to aim and fire something in a two-handed grip versus one, especially like with a rifle where you can stabilize it with your whole body.
Phaser 3 also comes with the actual ability to target more easily. It comes with, I don't want to say auto target, but it comes with aiming assistance.
Does it? I mean,
I believe that was.
Well, Kira referred to like multi-target acquisition or something in that episode when she was doing the. This rifle is basically a Vietnam era M16, and this one's a Vietnam era AK-47 bit. But I don't. She didn't really explain what that means, and I'm leery of ascribing definitive capabilities to offhand statements.
That's fair. I wish I'd looked this up. There is actually an earlier episode, I believe, where she and some old cell resistance are sort of fighting the man, the local Bajoran government. And I believe at one point they were looking to ambush the people sent after them, and they were looking into, I think, either pistols or rifles, but they had like little display screens, and they were sort of like zooming in on the target. When it comes to aiming assistance, I think what it does is it allows for the phaser rifle to get a lock, and then it might adjust the nozzle slightly. You know, if they move a little, or if your aim is slightly off, it locks and sort of just holds within like where the middle of the nozzle can fire from. I don't think it's a perfect, kill bot design where you can just fire it from wherever and it'll just like magically hit its target. I think it's mostly just aiming assistance. And I only think it works on Phaser 3. I know people have argued for Phaser 2 having it, but that'd be a terrible idea.
I would stay away from just saying what it does and merely note how accurate people are with one versus the other, and maybe not try to say, well, that's because of this or that's because of that, and simply say, okay, people are generally a better shot with a Phaser 3 than a Phaser 2, for whatever reason.
Oh, no. What I'm saying is that it's just one of the abilities it has. Whether or not people are good shots or bad shots with it, it mostly relies on the person firing the weapon. I mean, you can have something there that assists you in making a good shot, but if you're a terrible shot, you're still going to miss.
Yeah. I mean, we do know Starfleet does phaser aim training, like that thing with Worf and Guinan and all. Yeah, I can go down to your level, Worf, and shoot at your little easy mode phaser settings.
Yeah. Let's see. The Phaser 3 has a maximum power capacity of below 4.7 megajoules, and its highest known output is 1.05 megawatts. I believe we were discussing before you had sound the limitations on that.
Well, not necessarily the limitations on the wattage, but the limitations on more like wide beam and perhaps the power output and wattage being related to what wide beam settings are and aren't used for and what their tactical implications are.
Right. I would assume that when they set the phaser rifle to wide beam, or set the phaser to wide beam, it tries to fill the area with the same amount of energy as it would in a condensed beam. So if you're putting out like 10 joules in a thin beam, you have to then expand that into the whole room. So that's why I don't think we really see anything besides stun and maybe a low kill setting set for wide beam. I think Tuvok threatened that.
Yeah, and
I know. Go ahead.
It's possible that you can fire a wide beam kill, as in a single shot, and then it'll drain the battery, or that much energy flowing through the emitter will burn something out. Or my main point was simply that, based on how we've seen Starfleet soldiers fight in combat, they don't use wide beam settings under nearly any circumstance. So it is unlikely they'll do so here, and it's certainly unlikely that wide beam settings will be of it's not going to swing the engagement one way or the other because they have this capability, and the UNSC can only shoot where they aim.
Okay, yeah. I don't see wide beam being much of a feature or a useful feature in this. I don't think they used it because wide beam in and of itself is generally not useful in a lethal battle. It uses a lot of energy. It covers a huge area. And you might hit someone who is on your side. And it takes time to adjust the phaser. Are you familiar with the buttons for a phaser?
I know they've got a couple buttons on them, and I've always wondered how much of those buttons are, if it has actually an appropriate amount of controls to do everything they do with it, and I've suspected that they actually don't, and that's just one of those things where the TV writers tend to fudge things, or because like a phaser 1 or a phaser 2 has like 2 buttons and the trigger. Three buttons and the trigger.
2 buttons and a trigger,
yeah. Yeah, like you can't really do, and I think like one of those buttons is like the power button.
I don't think there's a power button.
It's very difficult to foresee. I think I can still, if I'm getting your point right, I'm assuming you're saying it's very difficult to change settings on the fly because they have limited controls, and so the process is very complicated.
It's not that it's complicated; it's that it's time consuming.
Okay.
You were correct. There's 2 buttons and the trigger button. One button is to set the phaser power, and the second is to set the beam setting. And the way they work is basically think of the volume in your remote control, and you just hold it and it goes up, and then you push on the other side and it goes down. So those two buttons, they actually press one side of it, it goes up. Press the other side of that button, it goes down.
Yeah.
And that sounds easy enough, but if you're trying to say go from a stun setting to say 10, not the maximum, but 10, it's kind of hard to wait till it gets there and not miss it, overshoot it, or undershoot it, especially when you're being fired at.
I was actually under the impression it was just one click, it goes back up, but I guess that would be kind of awkward. Oh crap, I scrolled past my setting, now I have to just click back and cycle through the whole list again.
Yeah. That would be a horrible design setting. Oh god. No, it's like one of those buttons, those slightly annoying kind where if you're too far on the left side or too far on the right side, it doesn't do what you want. So I think that's why you don't see in like a pitched firefight, people just immediately just set their phaser to a much more preferred setting in the middle of a firefight.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's one thing to adjust the power of your phaser, because at least if you shoot it, it still shoots a straight beam at your target and it will probably kill them. But adjusting it to wide beam or narrower beam, I think, is just asking for trouble.
Yeah.
In most pitch firefights, there are still places they could have used it. AR, was it 115?
558.
Yeah, 558. They could have had a couple guys closer to the front set their phasers to wide beam, and it would have helped. I think.
Well, a lot of things would have helped on AR 558, which I suspect we'll get to as things go on here. But is that the main points you want to go over with the phasers?
I think so. Yes. There is one point in Doctrine, and that is, I think, the idea. Kira sort of brought this up when she was talking about the Cardassian phaser versus the Federation phaser. The Cardassian phaser has two settings. As far as I can tell, it's kill and just like a high-powered phaser blast. Because I don't think their phaser rifles actually have stun settings.
Well, no, there is. You take the rifle and you just club the Bajoran resistance member with it, and that's the stun setting.
Then you hit them with the kill setting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it sounds like some of the Cardassians would think, like, if you're using a rifle, chances are it's an insurgent or it's an enemy, and you're just going to kill it.
There is,
so
I mean,
think they sort of.
There is a certain oddity with Starfleet having two settings in the same gun. That's like having a modern handgun that's like a handgun and a taser built together, where, yes, you can see the practical value of those things, but if you need one, you shouldn't be in a situation where you're trying to use the other. Like, if it's a situation where you want to tase a guy, you shouldn't also be pointing a loaded firearm at him. And if you need to, shoot someone, you don't want the extra weight and bulk of a taser on there. So, and Starfleet obviously has different things because it's simply just pushing buttons on there, but there is that odd, I would guess, doctrinal or tactical role mismatch oddity thing where the phaser's trying to be the do-everything sidearm.
It is. Other powers in Star Trek are a little more pragmatic about it. Even like when you look at the Cardassians or the Klingons, they do have stun settings, but it's generally on their pistols, and it's generally like their settings are generally stun, rise.
Yeah.
Whereas Starfleet, there's like 16 different fucking settings on like their fucking handgun. And I see that more as Starfleet just being seeing itself more as a peacekeeping force, where a phaser looks to them is more like a tool than it is a weapon.
Yeah.
Whereas to most everybody else, it's a gun. It's there to kill people. If you're nice, someone's in your house, you don't know who they are, maybe stun them.
Yeah.
Unless you're a little more to the right, in which case you just crank it up to vaporize.
So moving to the UNSC side of things. I mean, I noted in the audio-less version of this stream. I'm not saying that it would add extra weight or bulk. I specifically said it doesn't because of a phaser. I'm just making a comparison regarding.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Or addressing the stream here. It's not that it would add weight or bulk, just that it's a duality of purpose that seems odd to me because that would be the comparison of a contemporary one would be having like a handgun taser combo weapon, and
it complicates things.
Yes, precisely. Not that it's bulkier, simply like a 9mm handgun in it with a taser duct taped to it would be bulkier, but a phaser isn't. But it's just it's a dual function that's relative to what a military handgun should have. Odd. But anyway, regarding UNSC weapons, so as anyone who's played the games knows, unlike actually, unlike a lot of settings, come to think of it, the ray guns are very popular for some reason. But UNSC has guns; they fire bullets. They're somewhat better than modern ones, but not like to a noticeable degree. Like if you shoot someone with an MA5B, they're not going to like explode into little bits of giblets. Where if you shoot someone with a modern 7.62mm round, they're just going to be okay. They're comparable, maybe slightly better, but nothing specifically. No, stream. It's fine if you chat. I mean, that's kind of the purpose of live streaming this versus just recording this to have that audience interactivity. But anyway, regarding
you guys can post whatever you want.
Yeah. But anyway, so UNSC firearms, they shoot bullets. Bullets will kill people if you shoot them with them. Nothing specifically tactically implicated with that, other than maybe requiring slightly more aim than a sometimes massless, sometimes not particle beam or whatever. The two main points I have is as came up in Siege of AR-558. There was a guy passing out phaser clips to the Starfleet soldiers there, but he was passing out like a clip to people, which I do not believe is because of low supplies, because Cisco and his crew were there on a supply run, so
that's true.
It's more likely to me that a phaser rifle is likely to run out of ammunition during an extended firefight, but it's not likely to run out of ammunition twice during an extended firefight. So that suggests it has a greater ammunition capacity than just a standard rifle, which for the UNSC is usually 30 rounds. A battle rifle has a BR-55 has effectively 12 rounds because it fires in bursts, but if you use the burst fire setting, which you can in the books but not in the games, because I don't know, Master Chief likes wasting bullets on grunts. I don't know.
Well, it's an action game. It's not going to be 100%.
Yeah, it's a complexity thing because they don't want to have the player managing different ammo things. But fundamentally, most UNSC rifles have 32 rounds, the lowest. And I think the biggest one is the Halo 1 rifle with 64. So less than a phaser, possibly quicker to reload. I don't think we've actually seen a phaser be reloaded mid-engagement. Not sure how long it would take.
With the Lego rifles, the power pack is actually on the back. It's like that dark gray spot. Maybe it looks black.
I don't know. I thought the guy in AR-558 was pulling out a picture of smaller ones. I don't know.
He might have. The thing is, with Star Trek, they tend to mess up some of their prop stuff.
It could be, but...
So it's the power pack is on the back. It just kind of slides off and slides on. At least for the original Phaser Rifle 3.
Okay, so that should have broadly similar reload time to a standard rifle, but that would be the main capacity with the UNSC, is that they have less ammo. But, unlike the Federation, all Federation weapons seem to be semi-automatic. I mean, you can argue that, okay, well, it's firing a continuous beam, but it's not being used like an automatic weapon, and they fire very short-duration beams. But in practice, all Federation weapons are semi-automatic. UNSC weapons have full automatic capability, which means they can fire suppression fire, or they can use tactics that the Federation can't necessarily pull off, or cannot pull off as well, or has to find a way to work around, because the UNSC weapons have a greater fire rate. I don't know, also the other big factor was, unlike the Federation, which has, a handgun and a rifle, and then the odd one-shot weapon of the week that will vanish into the armory and never be seen again, the UNSC has a fairly wide, has everything from, they have pistols, they have shotguns, they have submachine guns, they have assault rifles, sniper rifles, rocket launchers. I think for the purposes of this versus, it's unlikely that they will have something like a Spartan laser or similar rare weapons, because, I mean, the average random UNSC platoon will not have that kind of hardware available. But if there's an engagement that needs specific weapons, or they need to engage a specific range, the UNSC has a weapon for that, and they have a well-developed doctrine to use that weapon, while the Federation is much more handicapped and much more limited in that regard. So, at least for me, despite the advantages with fire rate, I would rate just weapons. I think the UNSC has a solid leg up as far as just the individual small arms go.
Okay, I sent a link in our Hangouts message thing, and it's just some pictures of some phasers. Top one will be the actually it's the Siege of AR-55 phaser rifle, but you'll see in the back, if you go to the zoom, there's like a dark gray.
Yeah, I see
it's detachable. It has still the same amount of settings, same amount of buttons. And you can also see the little sight they gave it.
Yeah, you mean the little flip-up screen, or
Yeah, the flip-up screen. Yeah.
I would point out that can't possibly be a gun sight because uh, you can't aim with just one sight. You need two to line them
Oh
up.
no, no, no. That's true. I think that's more of a display. I think due to the limitations at the time, they couldn't actually put up a actual screen,
Maybe
and they
I
just thought they do get better.
yeah. Well, I mean,
Like
it's. I mean, there's not much. I can't really criticize UNS or Starfleet site design because like I actually have a prop one around here somewhere. Well, not a prop. It's a dart gun, but I have an MA5. It has no sights. So, if your in-helmet HUD targeting doesn't work, you are screwed because you cannot aim that thing. Until I think in 5 added an aim-down sight feature, which I guess was supposed to always be there, but never wasn't because, I don't know, Halo wasn't desperate enough to start ripping off COD that blatantly. But yeah,
yeah,
so do you want to move on to the next subject then?
actually
Or
a bit of a
make any rebuttals?
runoff. What was it? Actually, the original cricket phaser from like TOS, it actually had sights. Did you know that? It had a reflex sight.
I did not. I was not. I did not spend that much time. I haven't seen TNG in a while, and I was usually focused on. I hadn't reached that versus mindset yet, where you hyper analyze all the guns and details and technical dialogue and kind of skip the plot.
Oh, actually, this only came up because of what I saw on Atomic Rockets. They actually made a note of it. There's actually have you ever heard of a reflex sight? It's basically where you use mirrors or a camera and you just look into like a little.
I'm aware there is a thing called a reflex sight. Don't know how it works.
Okay, basically it's a series of mirrors, so you look at what the barrel's looking at.
Oh, that's
handy. So whenever
Kirk
was looking down and firing his phaser, he was actually looking where the barrel's pointing.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, yeah.
Okay, so I think you're. Do you want to move on to the next category for debate here, or?
About to. I did want to say a few things about Phaser 3. I think the reason why Starfleet tends to use the Phaser 3 and Phaser 2 as its only two main arms is because of its versatility. You can easily switch a phaser from being just a normal rifleman to a normal rifle with that, you shoot someone and they die, to essentially an RPG. You could blow up. You could blow a hole through a wall. Maybe take out a vehicle. And it certainly has its limitations. Well,
I'm just to clarify, as far as this is just an opinion difference. I always operate off of it can do what we've seen it do. We haven't seen a phaser used to shoot down a vehicle or something, so I'm leery of ascribing it that capability. The closest we had was I want to say it was like not the Ensigns of Command, but like that Lower Decks episode with like the little low-ranking officers on the Enterprise in like late season 7, where Geordi was shooting up a shuttle with a phaser to make it look like the. That would suggest that it is at least viewed in universe as possible to disable a shuttle with a phaser, but you need to shoot it like a dozen times. I don't believe that would be practical to use it as an anti-vehicle weapon, given that limitation.
I would disagree somewhat. We do know the output of a phaser rifle. It's 1.05 megawatts. If you fire that at a fair amount of vehicles, it will do some damage, and that's just the energy the weapon discharges. It doesn't include like the NDF effect. It may not be effective against something like a tank or like a heavily shielded, not even heavily shielded, or a shielded shuttlecraft.
I would point out that
there's obvious limitations to it. Go ahead.
So, like you're saying, like it could. I can obviously take out light vehicles because I mean we've seen them, hit like blow up rocks or command or consoles and kind of or lightly armored stuff like that. My issue is we haven't seen them useful against heavy cover or heavy armor plating. So, and we've actually seen them ineffective at cutting through like dense metal in a couple times, like in Deep Space Nine, where they needed to cut through a wall. They had to get like a conventional welding torch because a phaser can't burn through that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Like I said, obviously the NDF effect drops the more denser the material. So you hit a squishy human, they'll vaporize. You hit some rocks, it'll probably create an explosion. Now, if you hit, like, say, a car, it may not vaporize. It may not even go boom, but you're still hitting it with 1.05 megawatts, like 1 megajoules in like discharge in 1 second.
You're using that setting from what was it?
I think it wasn't
that episode of like the Romulans like supplying fake weapons.
Yes.
Okay. I remember.
It was a forgery, but yes.
So what?
Go ahead.
I remember there was an issue with that figure where, like, with that kind of power draw and their stated efficiency of a phaser rifle, the waste heat would be dangerous to the user. So I'm somewhat leery of saying that is their max output. That might be the Starstory.net brought up. That's probably a setting they lock out just to let them actually test stuff like this, because small differences are magnified by that kind of power, like that EM drive thing they were talking about a bunch last year, where people wanted them to build a bigger one. So if it's actually doing something useful, then if we build a big enough one, we will be able to detect that notice. Same principle with like the 1.5 megawatt thing, which is why, but because of that waste heat issue, I would be leery of applying that to what they can do in normal operations.
I'm not too concerned. It's possible they might have a heat sink in the actual rifle. As absurd as that is.
Yeah, but the problem is that kind of heat would still cause damage to the internal components of the gun. It's not, heat sinks just move heat around. They don't get rid of it.
No, that's true. But it's possible the gun might be able to withstand that much energy. I mean, they do fire capital weapons with much higher energy levels. It's possible that their smaller rifles are capable of that too. And I'm sure it does put a huge toll on gun. Yeah. I doubt this is something that anyone just switches on to maximum and fires. Even if the discharge energy didn't damage the gun, it would burn right through the power cell, because, like I said earlier, the maximum capacity is 4.7 megajoules.
Yeah.
The output is 1.05, and that's assuming like 100% efficiency, actually. Yeah. You might get like 2 16-level shots.
Yeah.
And that's it.
I'll just note there's a lot of possibly or could be, which is why I'm very leery of saying that a phaser can do this, because it is such an untested and unproven thing. But I think we've both made fair enough points here. Do you want to move on to what was the next thing? Grenades?
Explosives / grenades, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that will be one of our more controversial subjects, but go ahead.
The UNSC has frag grenades? I mean, there's not much necessarily to say. Like, the UNSC has grenades, they throw shrapnel, it's bad to get hit by one. They
use smoke grenades too, don't they?
I think they have them. I mean, they have them, and they've used them in the books, not in the games. But the UNSC, like, they have smoke grenades, they have flashbangs, but the average soldier will just have anti-personnel fragmentation grenades, because that's what you issue soldiers.
I believe soldiers actually also use smoke grenades. Granted, in the games, they probably do that a little differently. But smoke grenades are useful for blocking enemy vision.
I don't know. I'm assuming they are useful for that. I don't know how often they're issued or what they're used for. I mean, the closest I've seen is movies, and in that case, they're always used for target marking. So, which the UNSC does as well. But
I did do some. Someone actually, one of in one thread, when they were doing military based sci-fi. They linked to a writer who sort of went through all the basics of combat, and smoke grenades are quite commonly used. They're great if you throw it at the enemy. It means they can't see you. They can't see each other. It's great for when you're wanting to move your troops.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly useful. It's just
okay.
I'm unsure of how the UNSC uses them because I do not recall them using a great deal of smoke grenades in the books. Like they use them several times in the Flood, but to mark targets or like that kind of thing. They did not use them in the tactical role you're describing. So
okay. Well, I don't know enough about the UNSC for that. Let's see. So just frag grenades.
I mean, I think they have. I mean, they have like demolition charges, and if it goes boom, they have it. But for the purposes of this debate, mostly soldiers will they'll have like hand grenades, and then they'll have like explosive charges or something. But the main thing is just frag grenade.
Oh, sorry. I was including like rocket launchers under explosives too.
Oh yeah. Oh, and of course they have rocket launchers. So.
Okay.
And I mean, if we're counting rocket launchers, it would. I suppose we should note they have stuff like the Spartan laser, which is an energy weapon, laser-based, but it's unlikely that a randomly selected platoon will have one, so for like the platoon versus platoon stuff, unless you specifically say they have one, I'm not inclined to factor it in.
Okay.
And yeah, so they have rocket launchers, I don't remember, I do not believe in lore they're guided. I mean, they do have guided rocket launchers, but the standard issue Spanker rocket launcher is just an unguided 2-shot, 102mm rocket launcher.
Makes sense. Is that a heat round?
Let me look that. I do not know offhand. It explodes. It does bad things to tanks and bad things to infantry. Okay, let me pull this up here. Let's see what Halopedia has to say. Shape charge explosive missiles.
Sounds like it might be a heat round.
It says it's a heat. There's no citation on that. I'm not really seeing. I don't think it would necessarily matter precisely what it is, and more defined in what it does.
Okay.
Which it can penetrate armor, and it has a large enough blast radius that it does bad things to unarmored or lightly armored infantry in the blast radius.
All right. I don't know if rocket launchers are going to be too useful in this discussion, except for maybe like moving people out of entrenched areas.
Yeah, I mean you can use it to flush people out of cover or engage any sort of fixed emplacement, which I'm not sure Confederation has, but I guess we'll get to those.
They can kind of make them. They're not. It's a little strange.
Okay.
We'll get to that. Okay, so the UFP does have some grenades. Well, one grenade. Technically, they have in their history. The Federation has used 2 grenades. One is the stun grenade, which I don't think was used outside of Enterprise.
Not that I recall. No.
No. The second is the more controversial photon grenade, which we have a couple scatterings of uses. One suggested one, but
I wouldn't say we have uses. We have mentions.
Mentions. Yeah, that's more accurate. One possible use, but it's unconfirmed, it was the mortar used in Arena. That's so popularized as a photon grenade, it might almost be semi-soft cannon. Well, actually, it is soft cannon, but I set it aside as a separate thing for this. After that, we have Legacy, which is a 4th season, Next Generation, where Geordi suggested beaming a few of them into a nearby room on the lowest setting to sort of shake everybody else up.
Yeah,
After that, we
as a
had
distraction or something, and then
yeah,
I think they mentioned that
they
they
came
have
up with
stockpiles of them, and
yeah, Homefront
okay,
DS9. They had been stockpiling phaser rifles, personal force fields, and photon grenades. There's a fourth one, which was in Year of Hell, which Tom Paris makes an offhand remark about a photon grenade being able to breach a hull of a ship. To mention how paper thin the ship's hull was.
yeah.
And the last one, which is more obscure, I think, is in Gravity Season 5 for Voyager, where enemy aliens are using them to pelt at a shield that they'd put up, which they were sort of hunkered down in a crashed ship, and they were protecting themselves from raiders who were also stuck on the planet with that shield, but they were using photon grenades to try and break down the shields.
I recall all of those except the gravity one.
Gravity is more obscure. You don't actually get to see it. It's just a bunch of bangs.
Okay.
Unfortunately, and it was all the way in the Delta Quadrant, but they did think of them as photon grenades. So that's kind of where I linked them up as being possible to the mortar launcher from Arena. But we don't have any real confirmation to that.
Yeah.
If they are the ones from Arena or similar, no doubt the Federation would have redesigned it from TOS. It's possible they might scale up to really low-level tactical nuke, but at that point, they're also really dangerous.
I would note that's probably not likely. If you're assuming it's the same thing from Arena, I would note that given the Gorn ship actually dropped its shields to beam people up after the mortar strike, that doesn't really say nuclear weapon yield or even anything resembling it, because if that was the case, there would be nothing there to beam up.
Well, a tactical nuke. I'm talking something like only a couple tons worth of TNT.
It would still have killed everyone at the site, and as far as I know, the Gorn aren't like fanatical about retrieving the bodies of their dead or anything. So certainly not to the point they drop their shields in the presence of a Federation starship.
I don't think Kirk ever. My impression when I watched the episode was that Kirk didn't actually get a direct hit. I think he got a near hit. Because I don't remember there being any casualties. And Gorns are absurdly tough. So if you have like a small like 1-ton bomb going off like about a yard away, a couple of yards away, the Gorn will probably survive, but they might be injured, and they probably don't want to go for another round because Kirk had 5 more of them. They probably didn't know that, but they probably assumed he may have more.
I would also that's fair, but on the other hand, a 1-ton bomb doesn't put out a blinding flash of light that requires you to like shield your eyes from the blast. So,
I think it might. It depends on the weapon, because the blinding light is actually because I think of a nuclear reaction. It's not a high chemical weapon thing.
Okay, so
it's more.
But
we don't know what kind of weapon it is.
What do you? The only thing I'll point out from that is whatever a photon grenade is, they're not something the Federation issues to soldiers for combat use. So I speculated based on the Tom Paris thing that it's more akin to like a thermite grenade, where it's like a sabotage ordnance that you use to destroy equipment or material, not necessarily against people. I mean, it's possible, but the only takeaway I have for photon grenades is that whatever they are, whatever their uses are, however powerful they are, your average Federation foot soldier does not have one. No one in his squad has one, and no one in his platoon has one. They exist, but they're either not issued because the Federation frowns on just throw a bomb and just, maybe you'll kill someone, maybe you won't, who cares, indiscriminate weaponry, or because they're too powerful, or whatever they are, the Federation doesn't use them. At least not in tactical infantry combat.
I agree that they clearly don't use them most often. I think that comes with basic Starfleet doctrine, which is hinders itself Starfleet is sort of expected to de-escalate a situation. So I don't think most security forces carry grenades simply because they're dangerous. And it's, from Starfleet's point of view, it's better to use the stun setting or the kill setting if you have to.
That's true, but we don't see them used even by soldiers like on, again, a Siege of AR-558. No grenades.
True. That is very true. I think grenades are generally kept more towards a specific team. So you may not have someone with, and that's why I think they're more connected to this mortar launcher. You might have one person, I think, within a fire team, an entire fire team who has a mortar launcher. Maybe it's a squad. So it would be more rare, and with Starfleet, they may not even deploy them anywhere except below the platoon level. And I expect they don't deploy them all that often. I think they would only do so in military engagement, and only if they think it's going to be useful. Because, as we saw with Legacy, they were intending to use them, and the ship did have them. Homefront, Admiral Layton said that they were stockpiling them. So that does show that they were intending to use them. And while it's possible they might be like thermite explosives, I'm sort of hesitant to refer to them as, something that isn't a grenade, because it's sort of taking liberties in regards to the name. And I know sometimes there's a misnomers, like phaser rifle isn't 100% accurate.
Modern thermite grenades, they call them a thermite grenade. That's what it's called. It's what it's stamped on the case that the military stores them in. Like, grenade does not mean does not mean a thing where you pull the pin and throw it and people die. It means I don't actually know what it means, what the technical exact definition of, but it doesn't necessarily refer to something intended to be used as an offensive weapon against people, which I understand your point about how I think your point of view is possible. I just view it as less likely than a photon grenade being some sort of sabotage munition or other weapon not intended to be used as in an anti-personnel capacity, simply because of there's so many situations where if it was, we should have seen them used. I think we've both laid out our reasoning here well enough, so...
Well, I think we can move on to the second issue that people generally don't talk about because it is slightly painful, which is the Worf Zuka.
Yeah, that thing. What do they call that thing? Like an isomagnetic disintegrator or something?
We actually don't know what it's called.
I thought I've heard that name associated with it. Like was that from the script or from?
It's not from the script.
Oh.
What happened is in the script it named several weapons that Picard, several things that Picard was taking down with him, like transport inhibitors.
And it mentioned that name, and people just applied it to the Worf Zuka.
Yeah, there's also the Tetrion launcher, which is the idea behind that interpretation is that the pulse that it fires actually negates energy weapons or shields. Makes it harder for them to function, which is possible, but I don't really see that either.
I mean, I think the only thing as far as my view on the Worf Zuka is, it is effectively a long range. It's effective and accurate long range weapon with a known max yield of perhaps of a fragmentation grenade, and it's rarely used, at least as of I don't know. When did Insurrection took place? Like middle of the Dominion War, right?
During the Dominion War, yeah.
Okay, so it's either like some ridiculously prototype thing that hasn't reached widespread deployment, or like they only
I would
use it on
just
some installations for some reason, but it does not. I do not believe it's a particularly common weapon. Simply because for the same reason as the photon grenades, if it was, we should have seen it.
I would disagree with that somewhat. I think we do have to look at the budgetary issues. I don't know when Insurrection was made, but the budget between a movie and a TV is very different. And granted, it's not hard to just like throw together something that looks like a rocket launcher, but Deep Space Nine did not have a lot of ground engagements, and Starfleet won't generally take down heavy military-grade hardware unless they're actually going to war. And most of the deployments, I think we saw like a total of like 2 actual ground fights. One was after they crashed a ship, and this one was where they're like enemy lines.
As far as I know, we've seen two, but not the one you're referring to in Rocks and Shoals, because that was a ground engagement involving Starfleet, yes, but I would not necessarily say it was a representative one because it's Cisco and whoever survived the crash with whatever they had on hand. Uh, we had the battle with the Klingons in
Oh,
Nor the Battle to the
or
Strong
the
or whatever
Battle
it
for the
was.
Strong.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
we
then we
saw
had
something
AR
like that.
558.
Yes, AR 558. I would say AR 558 is a little on the offside because it was supposed to be a desperate battle. Granted, I think I would
A
have thought they'd
desperate
have
battle
more
where they were
artillery.
just resupplied with fresh stuff, and that's why Cisco was
True,
there. And
but
I'm
we
not going
don't.
to. And I would point out that when you have enemies coming at you through a choke point, a long-range fragmentation, if equivalent, launcher would be really useful to, like, say, shoot at that choke point and kill people coming out of it.
I
Just a
agree,
point.
and I I don't know why they wouldn't have it, but it's possible they didn't make them. I mean, they didn't have any available to even D Space Nine. I don't know what kind of supplies they got,
It's
but they did use explosive in that episode.
Yeah, they used the stolen Jem'Hadar ones, which
Yeah,
again, we're hitting
but
that
then
point where yes, I think we each have a valid point, and it is
mhm,
understandable. Like I understand your logic and reasoning. I just don't agree
mhm.
with it because yes, making a prop costs how much? Having what's his name, like Chavez from that Tom Clancy movie say, and by the way, there's, you know, isokinetic radiation and our isomagnetic disintegrators don't work. Costs no dollars because you're already hiring him to stand here and be in your show. So unless you guys one of those
True.
contracts where they like charge by the line, I think Kurt Russell had one of those in what was that movie?
Maybe.
Soldier, I think, because he like said nothing that whole movie. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. You were saying
Um, what was I saying? Oh yes. I also think it's Starfleet, Star Trek itself just doesn't really focus on like the heavy military aspect. The show is more about exploration, so it sort of stays away from the heavier stuff, especially during TNG.
yeah,
DS9, I agree. There's less of an excuse, but I think we see as the series not moves, but as the series becomes more modernized, insurrection is a insurrection and insurrection is a good example. Is they actually did have dedicated military hardware, and Picard was taking down like, assuming it's the Tetrion launcher, which I think is the best guess. I'll get to that bit a little later. He had like maybe between 8 and 10 of them. And those are the ones he was stealing. He might have had more. He might not have.
I don't know. I haven't
I
seen
don't think
Insurrection for obvious it's insurrection related
really.
reasons, or well, not. I have seen it. I don't remember it for reasons of it being Star Trek
Okay.
Insurrection. So
Yeah. At one point in the movie, Riker, Data, the core cast sort of
yeah,
goes down into the
No,
The
I remember the
captain's.
senior, so I don't remember like the technical minutia
Mm.
of exactly what he's stacking when when Data was doing his trailer fodder. Saddle up, lock and load, put that in the trailer
Oh, God.
moment.
Yeah, that basically killed the movie.
Yeah, I would say in the best case scenario where you're correct and they do usually have it and we haven't seen it on screen for one reason or another, it's still they have a grenade launcher. The
Yes,
UNSC also has a grenade launcher, so at best they're only slightly less outgunned.
I would agree. I think part of this issue is that the Federation sort of considers ground combat an afterthought, especially artillery. I think they're very focused on information and maneuver warfare.
I think they're obviously
And
focused on winning in space because, I mean, Starfleet seems to me like
well,
an
winning
organization
space.
where if we hold space, then we can win on the ground with, beaming people and orbital fire support and all of our stuff that our cool spaceships have. So we don't really need an awesome ground army.
I would agree. You're very much on the head on that. And I think that's why you don't
Yeah.
see a lot of tanks. You don't see a lot of heavy artillery sort of stuff.
You,
I
you,
think I think the weapon that Worf was using, which is basically a grenade launcher, in my
yeah.
opinion. Some people think it's an energy weapon. I don't. And
I
the
don't.
reason for that,
If it's an energy weapon, it's an energy weapon that fires an energy bolt that creates a grenade equivalent explosion. So the difference is academic.
actually, it isn't. At first, it does when you consider like output and such. But the most useful part about a grenade launcher is that you can fire it in an arc because of gravity. Granted, bazooka is going to have a lot of thrust behind it, but you could,
Yeah,
in
sure.
theory, adjust it with an energy weapon. If you fire it up into the sky, you're not going to see that. You're not going to see that stuff ever again.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking more in terms of like direct mechanism.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Sorry. That's what I
yeah, I mean,
think is most.
there's advantages to it being, I suppose, in theory, with it being a you never mind. I had a point there and I forgot what it was.
For indirect fire. I also think it's more of a replacement for the uh, essentially a grenade. It's their variation of a grenade so far that I've seen directly. The only other one was the mortar launcher in
Yeah,
TOS, which
which
was clearly like something that you fire at someone from a distance.
yeah, which
Uh,
I think that's if we go with your assumption on that, the problem with that would be not problem. I mean, it's the implication of that would be that a Federation unit is much more dependent on specialists
mhm.
and except for because like I mean, and the UNSC is too. I mean, if your saw gunner gets shot, you will have a hard time, but you can compensate a little bit because you all have assault rifles. They can lay down a sustained stream of automatic fire, and I think the UNSC saw only has like I want to say like 50 round clips, so it's a very light automatic weapon
Mhm.
relative to whatever the like an M60 or whatever the replacement is for it in the modern arsenal.
I
So
would.
there is that, and
Mhm.
the problem is with the Federation with that is if your Worf Zuka guy bites it, you now have no guy who's going to be Worf Zuka-ing people in your engagement. Like you can't. I mean, yeah, someone could try and pick it up, but they have to expose themselves to try and run for the weapon. And
Right.
whereas with the
No, I see
UNSC,
what you're saying.
sorry, what?
I know I see what you're saying. In fact, I actually agree
Yeah,
to an extent.
with the UNSC, if someone needs a grenade, it's just, yo, Jim, you're closest. Throw a grenade at that guy.
Right.
But anyone in the
I
squad can do it. A Federation is utterly dependent on its specialist Worf Zuka guy.
I think that comes from just the sort of nature that Starfleet finds itself in. I think, although you wouldn't see this in any actual episode, I think the most experience Starfleet security has, which is their main sort of ground force. I know they actually have dedicated troops and like Starfleet commandos, but just going with the security guys, I think they're large. They're mostly dealing with people who either not peer enemies or like rebels, because you have you have 150 members, you have thousands of colonies. You're going to have people who rebel every now and again.
Yeah.
Even the most stable governments. So you deal with a few rebels. You have a ship in orbit. You say, let's just use Earth as an example for geographical reasons. There's a rebel team moving around in Oklahoma. You beam down like a platoon into a perfect position. You shoot them or stun them. They go down. You beam them back up, and then you beam them to New York.
Yeah, but essentially they're doing strict like tactical engagements where they choose everything and the Starfleet is not intending, or Starfleet isn't really capable of engaging in pitched large scale battle because that's not what they build their forces for, and that's not what they need to do.
I think what Starfleet isn't good at is attrition warfare. I think they're good at maneuvering warfare, and I think that's what they specialize in. Because maneuver warfare is very good at minimum casualties for both sides. You hit them where they're weak.
Yeah.
And when you look at the Starfleet officers, they kind of try and do that, where like they all try and come up with ingenious ways of getting behind enemy lines or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think Starfleet is very good when they have the advantage in sensors, communications, and transporters. When you pull those from the table, as you might have seen during the Dominion War, they began to crack. I don't think because they reduce aggression in their ground forces, specifically their security forces. I don't think this would affect veteran ground troops or Starfleet commandos. But the widest use of their forces, they're probably not used to getting shot back by professionals. If they do go down, chances are they're only getting shot back at a little. So I think they're more likely to freeze up. I also think that they don't know how to adapt quickly after things go to shit.
I think that's why there was that on AR 558 where they were stuck there, demoralized, and they were there for like 3 months or something, and they still. And
oh no, I think they're maybe longer, but yeah,
they were down there for a long time, demoralized, and like with those Houdini mines, they were just completely helpless, and it took someone who was a fresh arrival, who was not as just broken by that environment, to come up. Oh, hey, wait a second! I think I figured out how to do this.
Yeah, that one's a little harder, I think, just because you can find troops anywhere that get cornered and they're being besieged and they're just breaking down.
But would you say that's illustrative of the general principle you're trying to say, even if not in the exact specifics, but just the rough idea?
Yes, I would actually point to the episode where they find the crashed Jem'Hadar ship, and you can sort of tell the difference between the professional soldiers and the ones who aren't. Jadzia is the one who's always stirring up shit in that episode.
Yeah.
Because she can't handle the stress.
If you don't mind, I have to actually quickly run to the restroom because it's. Do you want to go over your stuff with like because we talked in the PM about the personal shields and stuff. So if you want to go over that for the stream, and then I'll rejoin you in a second.
Yeah, sure. Okay, and while he's gone, I'll just go through all the stuff he ejects. No, I'm kidding. Oh, let's see. Is there anyone even watching this still? Let's see. Oh, yes. Now more than ever. There's 5 of you. Congratulations. And by 5, I mean I'm subtracting me and Battlegrander, so there's like 3. There's Guardian and someone named SpaceBattles.com. Okay, who is actually SpaceBattles.com? Who's controlling that account? Is it Observer or Cool Guy? Were you just waiting to watch this shit show? I was honestly thinking Cool Guy.
All right, sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay.
We have a very professional and perfectly executed stream dynamic here with scheduled everything. Okay, so how much have you gone over with the shield stuff?
Oh, absolutely nothing. I didn't even get to it.
Oh. Well, I guess I didn't miss
It
anything,
is...
so...
No. Let's do hit shields, though. Go
Well,
ahead.
I would just lumping all the personal protection stuff under one thing, because the only main difference would be... as I've... Like, I mean, the UNSC has body armor. It is... not... It's resistant enough to heat that I think it's reasonably possible that... I'm phrasing it wrong. It is theoretically possible for a UNSC soldier to survive a phaser hit or two. The Federation has cloth uniforms, which are not bulletproof to any degree. So any sort of exchange of fire, a UNSC soldier is very likely to die from a phaser shot of whatever high power is necessary, but he might not. A Federation soldier will die or be incapacitated by return fire.
Right. How do I address that? Yes. I don't think Starfleet really armors their typical security force, and I think the reason for that is that in peacetime, or even in like the occasional like ship-to-ship engagement, any armor that any of the powers can provide in the Alpha Beta quadrant is not going to do shit at close range. We've seen Klingons and Cardassians in armor. Klingons, you might say it's cultural, but Cardassians are more pragmatic. Phasers are generally not affected by their armor. They just punch right through.
Well, that's part of why I would doubt that it's like the Cardassian uniforms. I'm not necessarily sure that's armor, because it's totally useless, and again, the Cardassians are pragmatic. They wouldn't have their guys walking around in useless armor unless like the Gulls just find it amusing. Like, let's send the troops on patrol in heavy armor that doesn't do anything just to watch them sweat. Brilliant plan!
They would do that, but then they wouldn't wear the armor themselves.
Yeah, no, because that, and they wear it in situations where combat is not going to happen, and something like Gul Dukat would not beam down to Deep Space Nine to chat with Cisco about the Maquis and what they're doing to blow stuff up with weapons they shouldn't have, wearing full body armor, because he's not in a combat situation. Cisco isn't going to shoot him, probably. So
he might punch him.
Yeah.
He probably will punch him.
Well, Kira was there, and I guess you never know, so maybe he had a reason.
Between the two of them, it's a foregone conclusion he's going to get punched. But,
yeah.
I think... Go ahead.
I think, as far as I know, the only times we've seen Starfleet soldiers in anything resembling armor is Nor the Battle to the Strong and AR-558, and
Correct.
They had those thick, bulky jackets that look kind of like what police use for training attack dogs.
Yeah.
Which because those are the only guys who use it, and they're fighting Klingons and Jem'Hadar, who are notable for being the only people who think don't bring a knife to a gunfight is a bad idea, and you should totally bring your knife to a gunfight. Is that there's some sort of stab or slash resistant armor, because I appreciate you're right that yes, and the Cardassians could probably provide a weapon that can kill a Federation soldier, armor or no armor. Possibly. But, you just said that you view Starfleet soldiers as more used to dealing with insurrection and rebels, and, your average rebel group, Farmer Joe with his space whatever gun, yeah, he can possibly punch through armor, but it's not guaranteed that every podunk rebel group out there can scrounge together weapons that will absolutely guaranteed punch through body armor. So it would make more sense for the Federation to have them at least on hand even when engaging such groups, but we've seen them do that and they don't have armor. So, and we've seen materials resist enemy weapons fire, like in Eddington's last episode with like those barrels, like the lightweight barrels that just jostle the side, and he takes cover behind them. They can stop fire for a while. There's no reason, even if that stuff wouldn't guaranteed stop a disruptor shot, if it's even likely to stop one, or even somewhat possible, they should have body armor, but they don't. So
Okay, I do want to talk about the ground forces armor since you did mention it. I agree that is generally useless in even I would say close to moderate ranges. I think where that stuff comes in as armor is actually to long ranges, because at longer ranges the weapon energy drops, the density drops. So if you do get hit by something at long range, there's not as much power. It may not keep you in the fight, but it may not kill you. If you remember the man who was wounded by weapons fire in Nor the Battle for the Strong,
There was a
I
whole
think
field
that's
possibility. You might need
generally
to narrow that down slightly.
the one who talked to Jake before he died.
Like the guy was like, "Oh, my platoon, did they make it to the hopper? Did they get on? Did we escape the Viet Cong and get the crew onto the chopper? I mean, did we escape the Klingons and get them onto the hopper? Sorry, wrong war movie cliche."
Yeah, that guy. I think that's the general best result for their armor, and that's why I think Starfleet doesn't use it outside of dedicated ground combat.
See,
because
I understand your point. I just can't agree with it because Starfleet cares about the lives of its troops. If there was any possibility, however slim, that this armor would help them, they would issue it to soldiers.
Oh, I agree.
And we've seen again the barrels or packing crates, or it is not impossible to make material or find material that can at least resist a phaser shot or a disruptor shot.
I disagree with the barrel incident because shooting into a barrel is different than shooting at someone who is in the barrel. Because if you were to turn that material into armor, it would hit the armor, and then it would touch underneath the armor is you. Whereas with the barrel, it hits one layer, goes through whatever inside, and might hit the other side. So if you're hiding behind a barrel, even if it kills whatever is inside, it may not hurt you. And I don't necessarily. I think it's the issue of penetration.
So then they get then they'd have spaced armor or thicker barrel material. But my point is,
but that would slow you down.
I mean, I think you're right in that you're obvious. It makes no sense that we know that there are materials that can stop phaser fire, but Starfleet doesn't use them to make armor. So I think you have a point in that. It's incredibly difficult to justify them not having armor, given that, again, Starfleet does care about the lives of its troops.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, your reasoning behind it doesn't entirely make sense. And
how so?
Well, I mean, again, your argument is, okay, well, because of penetration, if it penetrates, it'll still hurt. Okay. I mean, again, the armor. I'm not arguing that they should make armor out of barrel material and then run around standing around like Superman, blocking disruptor shots and going, "Haha, your weapons are useless!" And then one of the Jem'Hadar, just throws the rifle at them because that's what all the bad guys do in Superman when they realize bullets don't work. But I'm arguing if there's a chance, if there's any chance, and it's not made out of something toxic or impossibly heavy, or if it is at all possible, Starfleet should have armored infantry, and I simply can't fathom any reason why they don't, but I can't come up with any justification for why they don't, but it is possible. And I don't know, it's one of those just impossible contradictions that really bothers me. But I think what might be more important to note is that for whatever reason, they do not have any armor that would be effective against against just being shot. They don't have bulletproof vests or standard equipment. And this will come up later, or they do not have helmets of any kind.
Technically, they did in the 23rd century, but we don't talk about those helmets. I'm joking. No, well. The bright red helmets.
Well, you mean like the weird, like the football helmet things they had in like Star Trek
Yeah,
4 or different
yeah.
ones?
They had them in various different ones. They
Yeah.
changed them throughout.
Which I mean,
The red helmets would
which
make things
actually that's
worse.
another issue I have with like those helmets or with Star Trek Discovery, where the Federation has issued body armor to its soldiers in the past.
In Discovery?
Yeah, they
Yeah,
at least I think
I've seen
they. I mean, I
Discovery.
assume it looked like armor. I've only
Of
seen the
course
first
so.
3 episodes
Yeah.
because I just quit in disgust after that.
Same
So,
here. I think I had like 4 or 5. Yeah, they did have body armor there.
but as I
Not
recall,
body
even from
armor,
that
like
episode, it was kind of
vests.
totally useless.
Yeah, because apparently the monster that they were fighting could like tear through fucking steel for some reason.
I don't know. Well, I mean, even in the very first episode where uh, what's her face
yeah,
and
when they
what's her
fight
face, the
the
captain.
Klingons.
But anyway,
That was a shitty captain.
so I think it's best to just note that Starfleet is going to lose out on the armor and move on to the personal shield stuff because that's actually kind of interesting and worth discussing.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's first important to note that because of stuff like Star Trek Online or Hazard Team and of course Halo have introduced the idea. I think it's important for us to both note that neither of us believes the Federation has like personal wrapped around yourself personal energy shields like you see in Halo or Hazard Team or Star Trek Online or whatever. Correct?
I don't believe they issue those. No. Can they technically make them? Yes, we saw Worf make one, but it was in one-off thing.
Yeah. Well, I would argue that slightly differently. The Doctor's The Doctor's mobile emitter is for all intents and purposes the exact same technology as a personal shield. It is a force field, human shaped, can manipulate and grasp objects. I don't think the Doctor's resistance to weapons fired, but you could adjust that presumably, and they cannot replicate the mobile emitter in any way, shape, or form, or even plug together a crude substitute. So, given that, and given the lack of personal shields being employed in other combat, I'm concluding that the technology is not possible for them to employ or construct. I mean, Worf could build his thing, but he was also on the holodeck. And so I'm arguing, and at least for me, the best way of justifying that would be that he was like tricking the holodeck into creating a shield around him, not generating one with his comm badge. Because just like sending an activation, like activate these cells, activate these hologram force field generators in this pattern. Simply because again, the alternative would imply that yes, you can cobble together a personal force shield even if it only lasts for a little bit and probably not work, but it's lightweight. But Starfleet doesn't issue them because they like seeing their foot soldiers die.
Okay.
So that's my view on personal shields. Is not possible.
Yeah. I viewed it as something that's like technically possible, just not something that is practical in any sense. So, you might be able to wrap yourself in a shield, but how long is it going to last? How are you going to manage it? Because I believe Worf didn't just like shoot through his own shield. I think he turned it on, the bullets bounced off, then he turned it off, or it died, and then he shot them. So I don't think it's easy to manage. And even the species with shields, the Borg, they've only been able to produce EM shields, or shields that are directly aimed at phasers.
Do you hear me echoing? Because I just noticed that showing up on the stream chat here. Do you notice any echoing on your end with the stream, or?
I think I noticed a little echoing. I don't know how bad it is. They're saying yes. Am I echoing too?
No, not that I can tell. I mean, I have no idea what could be causing it, but we kind of had to. Okay, it's not echoing anymore.
Okay.
That's weird. Maybe it was like lag or something on some end here.
Maybe.
Okay, so when Admiral Layton refers to personal shields in Paradise Lost, what are you saying he referred to, and what does that mean as far as for a ground battle?
Okay, I'm not. In that case, I don't think he's referring to Mass Effect shields or Halo shields that you might find on a Spartan or an ME trooper. I'm thinking of more of that small little disc shield generator that Picard had in what was it?
Chains of command.
Not Instance of Command. Chain of Command. Yes, Chain of Command,
Yeah.
and that basically covered like a narrow hallway, and it projected a flat barrier because Picard actually had to get after a Crusher because she wasn't setting it right.
Yeah.
Maybe
it's almost
not.
like she's a
Maybe
doctor, not a
bring the
trained
doctor.
paramilitary commando or something.
That was such a weird episode. It's one of those things where they're clearly just putting these people, shoehorning these people into this mission
Because they're the main
the main
characters, and the
character.
main characters do everything.
Yeah.
Even tactical commando missions in enemy territory.
Yeah, I mean, Worf made sense. Worf made perfect sense. Crusher was like, "Why are you bringing this woman? Is there no one else in Starfleet who can do this job?"
Yeah. And Picard was really like, "Okay, so we need a commando team to infiltrate enemy territory. How about that 70-year-old bald guy? I think he's up for it."
Well, they had to shoehorn him in too.
Yeah.
That's the hilarious part.
Okay, so regarding the shield, so this is one of the things I always find interesting when we discuss shields is not necessarily how they work, but how they resolve against different things. We know that shield can block physical impacts, as you saw Cardassians ineffectually pounding on it.
Yes.
Conservation of momentum still applies. So when he punches that shield, that momentum has to go somewhere. So
it should.
Well, I mean, you mentioned this in the PM, so I have two theories, and I'd like to run them down you because Star Trek is still more your area. One option is the shield generator itself has like micro tractor beams or something to anchor itself, but I don't think that's very likely because we haven't seen that kind of technology employed to that strength on that scale. And the other option is the shield was actually slightly larger than the entryway. So it was so eventually it's like, this is the entryway and this is the shield, and you can't push a square hole through a slightly smaller, also square entrance.
So you're saying that the shield wall itself anchored itself in the
wall? Basically, or more like it was positioned so that just simply shoving it will not knock it down because it's being held in place by something else.
It's really hard to tell.
Oh yeah, but it's also, I think this is something that is worth nailing down.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Because, I mean, if you can toss this thing down onto the middle of a battlefield and create cover, that's great. But if a few bullets will hit into it and impart enough momentum to knock it over, not so good.
No, yeah. I recall an episode where it was with B'Elanna. She basically rigged a shield out of a phaser with some gear. There was no conservation of momentum. It exploded, it hit, and the thing didn't move at all. And the explosion was certainly strong enough that it should have just thrown it across the room. It's possible you might have something like the... Because when their ships move, they do counter the impact.
Like some sort of inertial dampening technology to hold it in place?
I'm thinking that's what it is, inertial dampening.
Okay, so...
It's possible, but...
If there's been other incidents where momentum should have applied and it was somehow dealt with, that's acceptable. My note was just wanting to clarify that detail because it is rather important in figuring out how this kind of thing works.
Yeah.
That said, I would then note that these things aren't exactly common either. So yes, some of them will probably have one, but I don't think they're standard issue. Everyone has one. It's like, maybe a few people have them.
I'm thinking it's more like maybe one guy on like a fire team might have one, or maybe one or two of them might have one. So yeah, it's not like everyone has one, but it's enough that like your fire team probably has one or two.
Yeah. And addressing the
And
stream, yes, my theory is that regarding the stream with the thing with the momentum, I'm saying the momentum has to go somewhere.
that's correct.
I believe Wong mentioned that as, and then I believe his theory was that the momentum would get transferred to the shield because that was what was projecting the shield. My note is simply that the momentum has to be dealt with somewhere and go somewhere.
Well, it would
Not
actually be
necessarily that it will be imparted to the shield, just that momentum applies.
yeah. It does apply. We know it does. For example,
Yeah.
if you remember Nemesis, when that piece of the enemy of the Warbird fell off and collided with the Enterprise E, there was a shaking in the ship.
Yeah.
And every time you see like weapons fire, the ship does jerk. So there is obviously a limit to the inertial dampening, but it's always less than what it would normally than what we would normally expect it to be.
Yeah.
And I would guess that's the same issue with the mobile shield generator that Picard was using. In fact, looking at the hallway issue, even if you managed to ram at the shield and move it a couple feet, all you've done is move the impenetrable wall a few feet back, while presumably your target's getting away.
Yeah. All right. So, was there anything else you wanted to cover as far as personal defenses?
Yes. As far
Okay.
as that shield goes, given its size, it's probably strong enough that you could probably take a phaser to it, and it might be able to stop the phaser, even if you set it to maximum. I'm guessing the output is it might actually be large enough for 2 power. I'm using this based on like the size of like Federation phaser rifle power packs, so
That
it might
seems
have enough.
reasonable.
Yeah, it might have enough between 4 and 8 megajoule capacity. Um,
I think the obvious necessary issue is not is that unless is that I mean the Covenant actually has a similar gizmo to this. They have a
yes, they
deployable
do.
cover shield that they toss
Mhm.
out, and which is actually rather bad for Starfleet because that means the UNSC has experience in dealing with this.
They do.
And the usual way to deal with that in game is not to shoot through it. It's you throw a grenade and hit the guy and take out people behind it that way, or in
Yes.
other words, circumvent it. Which that actually might be something of an advantage to the UNSC, and that most in the Covenant infantry scale force field technology, like with the Jackal
Mhm.
shields or their cover shields, is resilient enough to the point that shooting at it is not necessarily not pointless, but an inefficient way to go about things.
Yes.
Federation technology. I mean, if you're saying like 2 phasers, that's like a rocket launcher could probably punch through it or knock it down.
Yeah.
That seems less. I don't think I don't think a rocket launcher will take out one of those Covenant shields. So
Actually, I don't know if they, because it is. I assume its maximum capacity at any given time is like about a megawatt. So it would depend on how much energy you could drive at it. I don't know how much energy actually a rocket launcher contains. So if it
I'm
has
not
more
sure either.
power,
I tried to look this up, but I got all of like penetration and rolled homogeneous armor, and not necessarily
mm,
joules. But my point is that I think it's likely the UNSC will treat Federation force fields as being effectively invulnerable, even when they're not, simply because that's been their experience with any
yeah.
kind of stationary
Well,
force field setup.
they would be right to do so. The reason is that their rifles and their sidearms won't penetrate that shield
Well, no, but
in any given time.
no, but heavy
Um,
weapons would, but the UNSC would
oh
not
yeah,
necessarily think that they would, because in their experience, a force field means, aha, you're not getting through here, human.
yeah, yeah. I think that's correct. I think they'll have a very strong grasp of how to deal with that shield. I think though that the small personal force field is not generally designed to hide behind and then like act as an impenetrable barrier. I think maybe it's there to create impromptu defenses if you need to, but also to cover retreat.
Yeah.
So if you're getting hit pretty hard and you can't get
You
out of
set one of these
safety,
up in a tunnel and you leg it.
yeah. So I think that's what it's most likely to be used as.
Yeah. One other note I would point out with it is Federation force shields are invisible. Covenant ones are not.
That's
So
true.
there are other circumstances where that would be bad. As I mentioned before, UNSC has lots of grenades, which would bounce off if they hit, say, an invisible wall stationed behind what looks like a good opening.
Oh yeah.
So that is going to be a learning experience for the UNSC as well.
Well, the UNSC can adapt to that.
Yeah, no, I mean,
a few bullets in the direction.
It's not like it's going. I don't think it's going to simply. Again, this isn't going to be a war-winning thing, but it is going to be something. No, it might come into play
in
at least once.
Yeah.
Okay,
no,
so
I agree.
Do you want to move on to what's the next chapter? Other gear.
What was it? Let me check. Don't need to. My notes won't scroll down yet. Let's see, what is other gear pertain to?
You have communications, jamming, sensors, intelligence, AI, and rations, supplies, logistics. And it's like communications, jamming is one point, sensors, intelligence is another, and then rations, supplies, logistics is another.
I think we can mostly just clog that in together.
Okay, well, but yeah. I think the big thing that's worth noting is I mentioned that the Federation doesn't have helmets before, and that's important to me. Not simply because it means they don't have helmets. It means that's just one of a lot of pieces of personal equipment the Federation should have that they don't like. They don't have shovels or gas masks, night vision equipment. They do have tricorders, and those can make up for a lot of it, but my fundamental point is the reason I find that, particularly with the lack of helmets, problematic is if you have a helmet, then you can just take a set of night vision out of your pack, clip them to your helmet, or you can clip your gas mask to your helmet, or it's a good mounting place for equipment, and the Federation has none of that equipment. So, and the UNSC does. The UNSC has. I don't know about gas masks. I mean, I know ODST visors are sealed. I don't know if standard infantry have them, just because gas attacks don't come up all that often. But they have night vision.
Yeah.
They have, they have entrenching tools because they have a lot of other gear and equipment that lets them engage ways in Starfleet can't, like a night engagement, or like with tricorders. Yes, a tricorder will help you know the enemy is coming and see roughly where you are, but a tricorder can't help you aim. A night vision,
generally no.
Yeah, a night vision camera on your helmet can let you actually aim and fight at night, not merely know you are about to be attacked. Which, I think then the only other point of note I would bring up is that I think comm badges are inferior to simple radios because a comm badge speaker is, on your chest and by necessity broadcasts much louder than just an earpiece. And it's also more prone to getting knocked off or otherwise lost. But that would be the main point in that. Perhaps because of the point you brought up earlier about how the Federation fights with their very mobile, beaming around stuff, is that the Federation is also, by necessity, not equipped for any kind of sustained conflict or any engagement that is not on their terms.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this is sort of an issue where if you don't use it, you lose it. I take it that in most conflicts, the the Starfleet doesn't have to deal with gas attacks. Gas attacks are generally not very effective in.
They actually do. In TOS, at least, it's mentioned that in one of the episodes where someone's trying to take over the Enterprise. I don't recall which. I want to say Space Seed, but that's because that's just the main one where everyone remembers.
It might be. It
But
might be actually.
they mentioned you have to take the bridge and engineering at the same time, because if you don't,
Mhm.
defenders in one or the other can just flood the rest of the ship with anesthetic gas. Which, also, war crime! Super war crime!
It's only a war crime if they can report it.
Well, I don't know, maybe the Federation's reasoning is like, well, we're explorers and, we're like space police, and the police can use tear gas, so we can, but I don't know.
Yeah.
They were running around strapping explosives to Klingon bodies in Discovery, which is also a super war crime. So maybe the Geneva Conventions just don't exist. But
Well, Discovery is
anyway,
also
but
shit.
anyway, the point
So
the point of that was the Federation does know, or at least in the past, has certainly had to face and deal with gas attacks.
that's true, but a lot of episodes that we see are probably like in the very minority, like the transporter issues. Like, how many times have the transporters broken down? But when they talk about it in context, like when it was Jordy and Barkley, Jordy was like, "Oh, there's only been a few of those in like everyday people being around."
Yeah,
I think it's more like that, and that's why it goes unnoticed. I'm not saying it's not a issue. It is definitely an issue. The biggest issue I think you mentioned is a lack of helmets and their communicators. The communicators being on their chest is fine for like everyday use, but when you're in a war zone, you want a helmet and you want the communicator
yeah.
right here.
I would argue the
That
night
is,
vision stuff is worse. Um,
I
I
would
mean,
argue that the night vision thing is because they do we do know they do have like goggles that they can wear for night vision use,
they do
but they don't carry it as standard issue.
they had those in Enterprise. In every later season, they just have like a flashlight on their wrist, which Tuvok actually used in that episode with like the con men Enterprise to blind people. So that's not just a TV thing. That's like a canonical. Yes, this is what they use, and
Although
that's fine for explorers who just need to see what they're doing in the dark. Soldiers actually need to be able to fight and engage in total darkness, and that's something that just flashlights don't do.
I agree. I think Starfleet generally addresses this in two ways. The first is if they actually need someone in there with like actual stealth goggles, they'll make the goggles for that mission. An example, if you remember that episode with
The
the
TR one
gun with the
16.
transporter, yeah, that was hooked up to the actual gun. And granted, that was a crazy Vulcan. But if you specifically need an eyepiece that can see in the dark and see that basically locked on to, not locked on, is slave to your sensor feed, you can have it. But I think that's a rare thing because Starfleet generally doesn't do night missions, and I agree this is definitely a problem, and it's something that will come back and bite them in the ass.
Yeah, and see,
Um,
the other problem that I have with this is more, it's not that they don't have it, because,
mhm.
I mean, okay, yeah, I can buy that maybe you were complacent, and, you got sloppy because of years of, brushfire wars and minor stuff, and you let your ground forces degrade.
Mhm.
A lot of CGR AR-558 takes place at night, and they still don't
Yep,
have them several years into a war.
I grant you
I
that.
am, and this could be the first time the Jem'Hadar have decided to attack people in the cover of night, except like in their very introduction and multiple other times since. But that indicates to me that this is not just an oversight; this is a systemic issue that the Federation is not fixing.
And that's where we hit the second issue. I think the way they try and address that issue is through the actual rifles, which is not a great way to solve it. But if you remember, those pop-up little visors,
Yeah,
I still think those are displays, and you can. I agree, it's not a good
I
fix.
would
It's a
point out
terrible fix.
that's dubious because again, in Siege of Area 558, we know a tricorder can detect a shrouded Jem'Hadar, but
Mhm.
only like detect, yes, he's here. It can't like pinpoint him for you to shoot him. And so we
Right.
see a bunch of Jem'Hadar run through the choke point, cloak, and then the Federation soldiers are all, where did they go? And not using their
Did they?
rifle
Did they? I don't think.
sensors to find them.
Did they shroud in that battle?
I
I don't think
am
they did.
90% certain they did. at least in a part, they like shrouded to get through the choke point and then ambush people or something.
I think because I think they sent in the holographic soldiers first, maybe, and then they came out of Shroud. But I remember.
Maybe they did, but in either case, a hologram also shows up differently than a person through a sensor, which I'm again assume the gun sight would detect. So
It's possible that they were sending back false
yeah,
information, like
maybe the false
Dice
lifetime
cast.
detectors from
The Dice
cast. Yeah,
that does get a little hairy. And I would assume that the sensors on a phaser rifle are actually very simplistic.
Yeah, I mean,
I agree with you, though. The lack of standard equipment is a huge issue.
Yeah, and
I think it falls back down to the we only need the bare minimum for our mission.
And more importantly, it's not just standard equipment. It's you know ration supplies. They don't have those, not on them.
Mm-hmm.
Like Federation soldiers have, their maybe armor vest, their gun, their tricorder, their comm badge, and that's it. They do not have a backpack to carry rations or to carry a gas mask or other equipment, so they do not appear to have a lot of endurance in fighting away from a supply cache.
Correct. I will make a couple. I agree with you almost 100%. I will make a couple notes. I believe Nog from DS9, he actually did carry a backpack around, but I think that's because they were using him as a pack mule, just to be a jerk.
That could be, which again is also still an even worse idea, because now if that one guy dies, now all your food is gone, and you're way away from your supply base, as opposed to just you don't go that far from your supply base.
Yeah, and rations, I think that's always been a bit of a mix, because sometimes it seems like they have the rations, and sometimes it doesn't.
They certainly don't seem to have anywhere to carry them on them.
Oh, no, they don't. No, I agree with that. They generally don't seem to have anything to carry it on them.
Weirdly, I would actually argue they don't have knives, except we do know that from that one episode with Voyager, with the macro viruses, Janeway takes out a knife, which I'm 80% certain is just a K-bar combat knife they picked up from a surplus store in LA. But Probably. So they at least have knives, which is kind of surprising because that's the first time I've seen anyone in Starfleet with one. Although I can't help but notice they don't actually have a holster anywhere to carry that on their person or a sheath. So
they're not standard issue.
Oh, that's even worse.
You can make them, but it was noted that by Nog, sadly, that in the Siege of AR 558, like the crazy Marine dude, he actually had a knife.
Well, he had a stolen enemy knife. That's a little bit more notable than just he has some kind of edged weapon.
Was that it?
Yeah, it was like a war trophy.
Okay, maybe that's why you said it wasn't standard issue.
Yeah.
Maybe you recognize.
I mean, we're talking about the guy with like the necklace of Jem'Hadar vials, because we can't do the ear necklace thing on television.
I would suspect that guy of being more of like a shrunken head sort of dude.
I don't know. You don't really have the resources to do head shrinking in an isolated outpost in the middle of nowhere under constant attack.
True, but they still had replicators, so maybe.
Yeah.
I guess you could like maybe try it out with a phaser, but it may not survive.
I don't know. I used to remember how they made shrunken heads, because there was like this big display at a museum we went to that had like preserved shrunken heads in all the stages of them, and I'm now wondering where they got the halfway shrunken head, because like that doesn't seem like the thing you'd easily find. I don't know. Maybe that's what happens when you donate your body to science and they don't need any more cadavers that way. They're like, well, hey, educating children about shrunken heads is technically science, right? Tim, pass me that axe.
I remember there actually being an issue a couple years back of someone finding like their relatives' body parts at like a museum or some sort of science place, and he had never agreed to donate his body to science. I think there was a lawsuit. Anyway, where were we?
I mean, that basically covers other gear except for jamming, which
I actually think there's
is
a little
interesting
more to this.
Because this is actually getting beyond the individual foot soldiers. Well, weirdly, the UNSC has jamming capability, but it's like it is in the real military. It's by specialists with special equipment and
Mm-hmm.
not like a mobile thing. I believe we've seen multiple times individual Federation soldiers like jerry-rig their tricorder into a jammer to block, this thing or that scanner or whatever. So it's this really weird thing where usually like with and a lot of these previous things, the UNSC has a technology. I don't know what the word would be, like democratized throughout all their forces, and everyone gets one.
Mm-hmm.
And the Federation has it in limited supplies or not at all, or in like a central spot, where this is the reverse of that.
I think it's uh, the issue with their tricorders. I believe they're generally just jamming. What is it? Opposing tricorders, which is possible, I think. Because you generally just need something that just interferes with their sensors.
Yeah.
It can be roughly the same strength.
Yeah, well, it's certainly possible to jam a tricorder because they jam their tricorders on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I remember one of them being like that episode of Voyager with like the Malon garbage monster mutant thing.
I don't recall that much. I only generally consider their tricorders. I generally only consider them usefully jammed is if they're in a ground engagement where they might have a small mobile device. Because generally, a ship jamming a tricorder it should be child's play.
Yeah. Well, and see, the interesting part is like I believe that this is going to bleed into the next one with mobilization a little bit, but the UNSC can probably find some way to jam transporters. Although, like we're doing like platoon-size formations, so that we're probably not going to have transporters coming up here. But the UNSC can probably find a way to jam transporters just because there's so much other stuff it does. But that would be
with EM fields.
Hmm?
They could do that with sufficiently strong EM fields.
I'm just assuming they can do something just because transporters have proven to be so finicky. But the other issue is that they will not necessarily have the same. Actually, we're already discussing. We should discuss sensors as well. But if we're talking about tricorders and stuff, but that's probably going to be about the limit of what they can jam, simply because a soldier cannot carry that much equipment cannot carry like a portable jamming equipment, and tricorders are very sophisticated and usually require, at the very least, something somewhat exotic to disable them. Which
probably.
I think the last point I'll make on sensors is that tricorders are they're this weird case to me where they're providing a lot of like strategic level information, like large range troop movements and stuff, to individual foot soldiers who do not need that information and who probably arguably shouldn't have that information, because you only need to know where to go, what you're expecting, and have something like a UNSC motion tracker to detect enemies right near you. You don't need to see, oh hey look, we're outnumbered 40-1 by this giant army we're going to try and flank. That's not information you necessarily want your grunts to have. Whereas with the UNSC, a tricorder probably doesn't capture anything that a UNSC like Argus drone or something can't capture, but like in a real military, that information flows much more compartmentalized, and individual soldiers have you have this motion tracker that will detect enemies if you're right on top of them, and that's it.
I think this sort of highlights Starfleet's almost entire reliance on maneuver warfare. Maneuver warfare requires that actually entire levels from like your platoon down to your battle team has a lot of information, and it requires you to be aggressive, creative, and active. Attrition warfare requires that everyone acts like grunts and just throw yourself into the plan, not necessarily in waves to get mowed down, but like a fire team, the leader of a fire team, a team leader, he will make those decisions. Like he'll give them orders. So them having tricorders isn't necessarily a bad thing.
I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. I'm merely noticing it's a very different. It's just a difference in. It probably might be a bad thing because again, there will be cases where you have to order a squad to fight at suicidal odds or something, and sometimes it might be helpful for them to not know that. But it's more just to notice that how information flow and is handled or how it is available because the UNSC maybe could give every squad its own drone to provide Overwatch and whatever, but it would probably just be too difficult to manage that because the squad leader has other jobs. So the central point is that just the UNSC will have kind of the same information as the Federation squad will. They'll just get it in different ways. Would be how I would describe things.
I think when it comes to the Federation, they rely on two major issues. They rely heavily on information, and they rely on mobility. So that starts with either having a ship, a satellite, or a probe, or even a tricorder. Get the information that you need, and then being able to get there quickly, hit the target, and then get out. That's essentially maneuver war. That is their essential take on maneuver warfare. I think where Starfleet cracks is, like I said, attrition warfare. And the UNSC it's more traditional like it is now, where not everyone can get that information. Whereas like a Starfleet officer, he can look at his tricorder and he has all the scan information within like 30 kilometers. They established that in Shades of Grey. For like the maximum range of a tricorder, I think. And that's very useful for Starfleet, but for War of Attrition, yeah, that tends to get in the way. You don't want the two guys on your battle team just like looking down at the tricorder every few minutes.
Yeah.
I think in this. Oh, here. Okay, so, sorry, Flying Monkey Death God was making a post.
Yeah, that seems a reasonable. Part of the problem with I agree with his point on the UNSC. Star Trek, I would not necessarily agree. I would simply say we don't know because we have such a small window into how Star Trek or how Starfleet fights.
That's true, but we can also look at their style, and their style does match up very much to choose your battles, and retreat when you can't win, or get more people to help you win, or set up a trap, or something.
That's true. I only know there are limits to what you can extrapolate for that. My favorite example for this is World War II. U.S. and Japanese air combat tactics, where the U.S., which was and still is a very individualistic country, had air combat tactics that relied very heavily on coordination with teams and wingmen and fighting together as a collective unit. While Japan, which was the exact opposite of the U.S. in as far as individualism, and still is a very collectivist, submit oneself to the group kind of thing. Their combat tactics were very much more geared around the individual, which is and that's the complete opposite of what you would expect to be. And there are reasons for why that came to be and how those tactics develops. But it's just an interesting point to the limits of what you can and cannot inform about or speculate about based on what information you have, because sometimes it'll be wrong or the exact opposite. So.
Yeah. Death Monkey Death God does make a slight point, but a fairly good point, is that Starfleet treats its security more like Special Forces would, in that infantry is expected to think for itself. And their idea about, and that's why they give them so much information. They're expected to be able to handle it.
That could be true, but that's in partly because
Mm-hmm.
we see them going on a lot of special forces type missions of
Mm-hmm.
hostage rescue and commando raids and whatever. That's not we don't really see perspective of you know some Starfleet grunt being assigned to storm a building or defend the line, aside from an AR-558 where basically it's hold this position and figure out what this thingamajig does. And in
Yes.
that case, their tactics were um, not very special forces like.
Well, that's where they diverge from modern special forces. Is that Starfleet has been so used to maneuver warfare that they're bad at attritional warfare. And you saw this when they came up against the Jem'Hadar, and to an extent when they come up against the Klingons. And actually you see it at Nor the Battle for the Strong, where they're having trouble holding the line. They cannot, when you are fighting an enemy that is just geared towards destroying you, and you can't run away, Starfleet, they just can't handle that. Not that they can't handle it; they're not good at it.
Yeah.
So, and the interesting part about the UNSC is the UNSC is more like our modern military forces in that they do use maneuver warfare, but they also use attritional warfare. They can do both, and the UNSC has experience with both. Maneuver warfare has been very useful in harming the Covenant ground forces a great deal. But they're also used to attritional warfare because that's all the Covenant really knows. I mean, they do have their special forces, but when you look at the Covenant, it's land there, destroy everything in your path.
Yeah.
So the UNSC is really good. They would actually be better adapted at fighting the Jem'Hadar than the Federation would, because they're used to not having that information coming in.
Well, to be fair, the Jem'Hadar are unarmored light infantry who still fight people in hand-to-hand with axes, so saying someone is well suited to fighting the Jem'Hadar is not exactly a high bar.
I would disagree with that somewhat. They do that, but that's because the Jem'Hadar, there's a difference, and this sort of it comes into the issue of what is valued. You and I value our own lives. U.S. soldiers value their own lives. UNSC soldiers value their lives. Starfleet value their lives. The Jem'Hadar don't value their lives. If they think they can kill one extra dude, or even help to kill one extra dude by just charging right in, they will do that.
I think that's debate. I think it's debatable to say if they don't value their lives. I mean, I'm sure you might be familiar with like his little "Victory is Life" speech.
Yes.
From that episode of the Iconian Gate. That's not necessarily the kind of speech I would say in that doesn't really say I don't value my life, and more I am willing to give my life for this mission, no matter what this mission is.
Well, if I remember correctly, I may be wrong. Their motto, "Victory is life," is you obtain life through victory. And you give yourself to the founders.
Essentially, the speech was, we're going into this mission and we're dead. If we win, we live. Was essentially what it boiled down to, which, I mean, that was it was more like just expressing a level of, I guess, fanaticism or fatalism or...
Oh, you're echoing again.
Crap, it might just be like mic distance or something getting screwy.
Yep.
I don't know. We are running a little bit late on this. Do you want to move on to mobilization? Because I think we've covered a lot of the miscellaneous stuff.
Yeah, we can move on.
Okay. So, I think for the UNSC, the 2 points is that they basically have two methods of moving troops around. Primarily, I mean, they have stuff like the Elephants or Warthogs, but those are fundamentally tactical things. As far as large-scale mobilization, they have drop pods for ODSTs, which are also which are like a tactical insertion for strategic goals, I guess would be how you would phrase it.
Yeah.
And then they have Pelicans, which is what they use for everything else. which is actually very interesting because like, it means the entire UNSC is an air mobile force, which it's not quite enough to compete with transporters, provided they, assuming they work, but it is incredibly impressive relative to any military today.
Right.
But the other notable thing to note about Pelicans is Pelicans are armed with chain guns and rockets and are typically employed to not just insert troops, but to insert and support troops.
Right.
So it's a point worth noting that does not happen with Starfleet.
For the most part, I would agree. Well, we actually haven't seen much in the way of their ground troops.
The only thing we know for sure is that there are the hoppers, which have apparently platoon. The guy said his platoon made it on to one, which would imply a very high transport capacity, unless he took a lot of casualties, and so his platoon was, like this 2 squads or something that could fit in a more shuttle-sized platform.
That's a rather grim view. It's possible, though.
Yeah, but
you do make a good point.
Key point, the more key point for that was possible size, and also that like he like sacrificed himself to let the transport take off, which to me suggests it's probably unarmed because in the real world, transport helicopters have like door gunners and other weaponry for that exact purpose, to hold off enemies while they evac. And having people have to do that suggests that they lack the means to do that, which which I would note might not necessarily not be that they're unarmed, and more that their armaments aren't suitable for this, because of the point I brought up with small arms, where Starfleet does not have automatic weapons. Starfleet has semi-automatic small arms, so you can't really do that kind of thing with, like, like a Phaser 3 on a gimbal mount in a door gunner position is not going to be effective at suppressing enemies.
Yeah, I agree. As far as him having to sacrifice himself, one issue is I think that when the thing landed, it would probably have to lower its shields if it wants people to get on. Because at some point you're going to have to walk through the ship to get into the shield. The second is, I agree, there's no fully automatic, so it can't just mow them down.
Yeah.
And if it has its shields down, phasers might be effective enough, or disruptors set to high enough setting, they might damage or cripple the hopper.
Which it's hard to tell how well that would work on a Pelican, both because Pelicans are armed and because Pelicans are incredibly resistant to small arms fire. There's a scene in one of the in the Halo Legends anime, which I will suggest is probably having some artistic liberties taken with it, given the overall art style. But there is a scene where a Pelican is trying to land in evac troops, and it's getting shot at for like 30 seconds by in the clip. It's like just it looks like a bullet hell game. It's just shooting at it with just like shot after shot after shot after shot. It probably wasn't that heavy in a realistic situation, but it does still suggest that Pelicans are enormously resistant to directed energy weapon fire.
It does. The issue, I think, might become when someone who is more discerning, especially if they can't just drop a shitload of firepower onto something, targets something that's more vital. So if you're a Klingon, you don't really have a fully automatic weapon. You're going to probably aim for the engines or something else that's a little more vital. And if you set your weapon high enough, you might actually be able to take it out. That's not to say it's an automatic success against a Pelican. You still need to be able to actually hit it.
They will probably be more. They might be more threatened by Federation weapons than they are by Covenant weapons. Or
I would think so. But I would think so, but it would have to be a phaser on a very high setting.
Well, I assume disruptors have broadly similar firepower to other weapons, but probably, I don't know. It would be difficult to compare them, but they're not. They're certainly not going to be necessarily immune to ground fire, just like they're not immune to it in Halo, and they will.
Right.
But they might get cocky and expect to be more resistant to it than they actually are. So that's one worth noting. My
Well,
other
sometimes
main
you're
point
desperate.
with Star Trek transports is that, again, like a Pelican is a flying APC, which means it's used, and it's also like a. It's actually interesting that the UNSC also primarily fights, yes, like maneuver warfare, but maneuver warfare for tactical battles. Like the strategic
Mhm.
movement in the UNSC is. I can't recall any solid examples of it. Like both they and Starfleet tend to fight very much in like tactical level engagements for strategic purposes, and like there's not like a Battle of Kursk equivalent in the UNSC, not that I can recall. But in case, the main point I was making was a Pelican will transport troops to a combat zone and support them. A
Mhm.
shuttle or a transporter doesn't really do that. It transports troops to somewhere, but it transports troops to there and then they're there, and they don't do quite as much tactical insertion of we've found this weak spot, we're going to fly you there. And for the Federation's more like we found this weak spot. I hope your boots are in good condition.
Um,
Like
I think
just
the
speaking of
difficulty here.
like for like with Northern Battle to the Strong. Federation is a
Mhm.
fortified base, and everyone is moving on around like with like hopper evacuation flights, or but other than that, they're walking. With the UNSC as the best comparison I could be with like Alpha Base on the on Delta Halo, where everything where there were very few situations where UNSC troops were going somewhere that was not being just flown directly there by Pelicans.
Yeah, I see your point. I think the issue with this is a few things to address. As far as the getting support from like a getting aerial support or transport support, it's a little hard to tell because Starfleet generally moves through transporter.
Yeah,
We have seen, uh, we've actually seen them use shuttles to support ground forces.
yeah, we've seen it on a few
Let's see.
occasions.
We do, but we also don't see much. We don't see too many fights where it escalates and they have to send something down to,
Yeah.
you know, blow shit up.
The other point I would note is that it's somewhat irregular
Hmm.
as far as how they do that. And like they fly very low and very slow, even
They
relative to
do.
something like an A-10, which I think it won't come up for like a platoon level engagement, but on anything larger, that's a bad idea if the enemy has capable anti-aircraft, and the UNSC does, which it strikes me because things don't usually escalate to that point, as you bring up. Starfleet
Hmm.
doesn't really have a doctrine or tactics developed to use close air support to support ground troops, and the UNSC does, which is, I think, a big capability where in any sort of long-term battle or war between the Federation and the UNSC, the Federation can probably clutch together an analog to any given piece of UNSC equipment or weaponry or vehicles, but they don't necessarily have the institutional knowledge to use it effectively, or they don't have the support structure or doctrine to employ it in a successful manner. They have it's not enough to have a ground support. It's not enough to have an A-10 Warthog. You have to have a tactical doctrine to use it. You have to have forward air controllers to call in strikes. You have to have escorts to get it to the target location, and all this other stuff that the Federation has limited experience with.
Um, let's address that. As far as shuttles, we don't know why shuttles go in as close as they do. It could be because of the limitations of the phaser weapons. The farther the weapon is, energy weapons lose their strength a lot quicker than kinetic weapons. Now, granted, the answer to that should probably mean get some more kinetic weapons. But if you insist on using phasers, and they seem to, getting as low as they do isn't necessarily bad. Um,
It's bad if you're
it
going to
depends.
be fighting anything with AA. When we've seen them do it, they're doing it unopposed, so that's not an issue. but it's bad practice if
Well,
that's what they're capable of.
well, they might be capable of more. They might be able to be hitting it. They could be capable of hitting farther away with reduced power.
Yeah.
They could also be capable of doing it a lot quicker. Like you said, they tend to have the luxury when they do it in the show. Let's see. What
I
I'm
think we
looking
are
at
drifting
here.
a little bit away from transports and focusing into air support, which isn't really going to be an issue in our discussion unless we
True.
are assuming, except for the UNSC having a couple Pelicans or something. But
Well, I did mention airstrikes as possible.
yeah,
Well, quote unquote airstrikes. But for Star Trek, half of that includes the actual capital ship.
yeah,
Taking
which
out
I'm assuming we're not having here because the general rule would be if you have a cap ship in orbit, you can probably win.
True, yeah. I was in this. I would be assuming like shuttles.
Yeah,
But then we'd have to also talk about Pelicans versus shuttles. But
yeah, not a good idea. A good idea, but maybe not for this one.
no.
But
Going back to transport though, Starfleet. Starfleet has three basic modes of transport. One is a transporter, which we all know, and that can vary from something on a capital ship or a base to a shuttle to a local pad to actually something as small as a little pin.
is the little pin thing actually a transporter, or is it just a transporter beacon?
It's an actual transporter.
Yeah.
It's retarded.
Well,
I don't know how it
that's
works.
actually worth noting in that because aside from the pins, which I'm noting are like probably maybe if we're doing this like classic TNG Deep Space Nine era, they don't have those quite yet. But the other thing I would note would be transporters are pads are fixed installations or on a shuttle. Like there's not like a mobile. You don't have a guy carrying like a transporter in his backpack that the squad can set up to evac. They're not inflexible would be the right term, but you can beam down, but it's difficult for a ground force to beam itself around unless they have like a central base with transporters doing all of that.
Yeah. It's possible to have like when I say mobile transporter, I mean like something you'd have to set up in like a forward base.
Yes, not something infantry portable. Effectively.
No. The only exception to that would be the one that we saw in was it shoot for
I want to say that
movie.
some aliens had one in Enterprise, but it was in like this weird hallucination sequence that Hoshi was having, so it probably didn't actually exist.
The other one you're thinking of is from Voyager, where Tom Paris sort of made his own little mini transporter that could fit in like his hand. That one probably doesn't exist. There is a third one, which I think was used on Voyager, but I didn't have enough time to look that up, and I wasn't too interested because Voyager tends to play hard and fast with the rules.
Yeah, but whenever I discuss Star Trek, it's always like whenever I'm like doing like I can always like take Deep Space Nine and TNG and conduct a fairly coherent theory of how something works, and then someone says, "Hey, but in this one Voyager episode," I'm like, "Oh."
Voyager had a lot of bad writing. They did
the understatement
stuff like that.
Of the night.
They would do weird plot contrivances of the week. And like I know Star Trek has done that a lot. And a lot of that comes from the
probably
fact
like triple the number of weird gizmos that will disable a transporter, which is impressive because there were only like a third of the episodes where it was that big of a deal. If you count like Deep Space Nine and TNG.
Yeah, Voyager would create them and then remove them. It was bad writing. They would create an artificial problem and then create something to remove the artificial problem.
Well, I mean, it's arguably an issue if we're discussing transporters and the fact that the problem with transporters is, I mean, aside from the moral applications of that they kill you and rebuild a clone of you in another spot, possibly.
Well, we don't actually know that, but
the main issue with them is because they're so powerful of a tool out of the setting to let the writers get characters into or out of situations at will. They have to come up with a bunch of things to break them and stop and take that tool out of their toolbox, which
Yes.
in universe means transporters are hideously unreliable. Which is why I don't believe. I mean, you'll see this in every versus debate where there'll be some guy who says, "Well, the Federation has transporters, so we win." No, like you can pull off a transporter win a few times, but it will be countered because the enemy will find something that jams it, and then you have to fight things out conventionally.
I agree and disagree to a certain extent. Transporters are given limitations. Most of those limitations are plot contrivances. Like there would be like some element of the week in the
Yeah.
mountains of this
There's
that
always
you've never
funny
heard of.
ore in the surrounding hills, or radiation, or
Yeah,
the
that you'll
sun.
never hear of again. They won't even use the same ore, the same bullshit ore. I generally discount those unless you're doing like a very specific discussion to bring transporters out of it. But I will. Something I do look at mostly for foiling transporters are EM fields,
Yeah.
like really, really strong EM
What
fields.
was that episode on Galadrin Core with like Geordi and the Rymulan guy, where like the atmospheric storms were enough to block it?
Yeah, yeah, like a really powerful, intense storm can do it too.
Yeah.
Radiation is also another counter, like high energy radiation, or not even high energy, like even being next to. Granted, it was an old bird of prey, but even Chekhov being next to like
The
the
Enterprise's
nuclear
reactor, yeah.
reactor,
The Enterprise, for the stream.
the supercarrier.
I don't know. I would almost say like for the benefit of the stream, but if you're watching a stream about Star Trek versus the UNSC having a shootout, there's probably a certain level of background knowledge that can be assumed.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that covers most of the mobilization stuff.
Oh, I did want to finish off on mobilization.
Okay.
So EM fields are the best way to counter that, and that's probably going to be a quick way for the UNSC to come up with a counter. I would disagree that you then have to fight it out normally, because you can always say do an airstrike and remove their EM fields and then transport in troops. Granted, it's an extra step,
Yeah. Well,
and there are ways to counter that.
And there are ways to counter that counter because it tends to be.
Yes.
Fundamentally, I view that being akin to saying like, well, yeah, it's easy to fight, this army. All you need to do is do an airstrike to blow up their fuel depots, or this other linchpin that their forces depends on, that's dependent, and then you have to fight. An the transporter jamming equipment is perhaps more linchpinny than most, but it is still fundamentally the same concept of, yes, you can take out this one thing and cripple the enemy, but it's really hard to do that because they know it's important and defend it.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. It complicates matters for the Federation. It's not just simply beam your troops into the enemy base. They do what they want. It's you have to alert the enemy base that you're going there because you're hitting it.
Okay.
Then beam in troops, and then hope they don't bring the shields back up before you get your troops back out.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the troops, of course, have to do their thing.
Yeah.
One last thing after moving on from transporters is shuttles. Shuttles can move them back and forth, and the last one is, as you said, you're walking.
Yeah. The Federation standard issue boot.
Yeah. They're very comfortable boots.
Yeah.
One addendum to transporting is you could transport near to an EM field, or just outside of it, and then move in. But like you said,
you can still transport your. I view transporter jamming as effectively a way to stop the Federation from transporting around with your troops. They can probably still move their guys around or insert near you. So the key would be to set it up so that it shields whatever your strategic objective is, or covers the main part of your advance.
Yeah, what you would, a traditional power in Star Trek they would lower the field, beam their troops in, bring the field back up before anyone can move into the gap.
And it's also notable that like the Federation has just like transport inhibitors. So in any long running war, it is possible that technology could fall into UNSC hands and be copied either directly or like find a replicator and have a UNSC AI hack it.
But we also don't know what a transport inhibitor actually is, so it could just be
it inhibits transports.
A fancy way of. Well, we know what its function is, but for all we know, it's just an EM field, and someone just came up with a fancy name.
That does sound like the Federation, doesn't it?
Yeah, it kind of
Okay,
does.
so do we want to address like the training skill thing? Because like I feel like we've done a lot of that
We actually
prior to
have done
this
that.
point. The only thing I would think would be notable is that you have the UNSC Army and Marines who are slightly different in some manner that hasn't really been elaborated on, but isn't notable, is like significant. And then you
Yeah,
have the ODSTs who are very much their own animal,
yeah.
which
Starfleet has, in my mind, 3 divisions. You have your normal security officers. Then you have the people who've actually had ground fighting experience. That would be like someone like O'Brien, maybe Worf, Cisco, and then you would have the commandos, who I think are the actual only professionals, if only
yeah.
because we haven't actually seen them on
But
screen.
you're saying, are you in your mind? Are you saying like how you would envision it, or like are you drawing on are these like three different branches, or more like just how you would categorize Federation troops?
How how I would categorize, although
Okay,
For Starfleet commandos seem to be a different branch. I think they're
when have we
even though they
seen Starfleet Commandos? Because like I mean the name sounds familiarish, but I can't place
it
it
was
exactly.
mentioned they were mentioned as a unit in Message in a Bottle. They weren't actually ever seen.
Okay, but
It was
but they exist to some capacity.
Yes, I think there are, even though they came first, they're sort of the descendants of the Makos,
Yeah,
which I think is a good way of comparing them. You have
yeah,
Starfleet Security, and then you have the
yeah.
Makos.
Well, see,
You can see which one you
I
like.
think the Makos are also an interesting example in that they demonstrate that um, I mean, the Makos are better equipped than Starfleet security at the time, but they're still not really good. I mean, they have like
Really?
okay, they have like camouflage uniforms, and I think they had backpacks, but they were still missing. They still didn't have helmets or a lot of other equipment. So
They didn't have helmets. They did have grenades. I think
they
the
had,
only
they had stun
like
grenades. Yeah. They
well,
had. I mean, again, there's like I know there's a quote by some general saying like if you don't have a shovel, you're not a real soldier or something. But they were still maybe not the predecessors of Starfleet's ultra tactical focus that they got into,
mhm.
but they were still not entirely in line with what uh, they probably should be for the setting and
Yeah.
technology available.
To be fair, though, they were Space Marines. Like they were
Yeah.
expected to defend and fight on a ship, not go onto
Yes, I
the
mean
ground.
there are certain. I'm not going to complain. Well, the Makos didn't
Mhm.
bring tanks with them
Oh yeah,
on the
yeah,
NX, but there
yeah.
are still some
But I mean,
equipment that I
like
think
the
they should
ship.
have had.
Yeah.
Simply because I mean I
Um.
would note Marines. I mean even in the I don't. I assume the U.S. Marines still actually have guys who do fighting on ships, but and are
Mhm.
they're sorry. I Marines even in the ye olde iron ships and wooden ships days or whatever days where they were seaborne infantry were still expected to be able to fight and engage conventional forces on land. So they were still trained and equipped for that.
Yes.
They're not just like the Davy Jones branch of the army
Mhm.
where if they leave the water they die.
Yeah.
Or
No, no, I agree.
okay,
Um.
so the actual combat, one on one in a wooded area was our first one here.
Yeah.
I'm split between saying this one is the closest versus this one is the
Hmm.
most one sided.
I would say it's probably the most one-sided if it's one-on-one. If only because if it's one-on-one, chances are something has gone wrong. Um, the Starfleet we'll go with security or general ground troop, is less aggressive because he's been trained that way. Um, his weapon is harder to adjust, even though it
Actually,
technically
wait,
has a
before we do the
wider
one on
range.
one, how much are
Mhm.
we assuming they know about each other?
Uh, General information, not anything specialized. Like they might have shot at each other a couple times.
Okay,
They've had a
so
few
we're not going to have like,
confrontations.
well, okay, it's a one on one. The UNSC soldier waits till night, then hunts the Federation soldier down in darkness and shoots him in the face. We're not going to have that kind of thing.
No, no, no.
Okay.
I generally assume that if if a group expects to be in a certain environment long enough, they're going to bring what they need.
Yeah.
So.
Well, so I'm more referring to like them not knowing, because like I think the Federation more so than in the UNSC has several very obvious weak points that can be exploited,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean the UNSC has their own. It's just going to be harder for especially like just a small unit level engagement like this. Like there's not something as obvious as wait until it's dark that could really hurt the UNSC.
Yeah, yeah. If they're unprepared, yeah.
Yeah. So in a one-on-one, I think I don't think it's. I think they'll both gain awareness of each other because even if the UNSC guy has a motion tracker, or
Mm-hmm.
so it's going to be difficult to catch him by surprise, and of course the Federation guy has a tricorder. So
Mm-hmm.
theoretically, I think the Federation soldier has the better capability to initiate an ambush because he'll be able to find his opponent more easily. I mean, I'm assuming we're doing in like a not like two soldiers somewhere in the Amazon rainforest have to find each other, but like
a park.
okay, the UNSC guy.
Size.
I don't think it's likely they'll catch each other off guard, but the Federation soldier has a better chance of, or a better ability to try and make an engagement on his terms because he can see where his opponent is, he can see terrain and try and set something up, but he probably won't get an ambush off because of, again, motion tracker. Mm-hmm. And at that point, then it just becomes and that just becomes a matter of like training and weapons and tactics and all that stuff, and that's the area where the UNSC really excels because the Federation soldier probably isn't going to be the guy with the force feet shield and the warp Zuka and whatever. He's just some grunt with a rifle, and so is the UNSC guy. But the UNSC guy has all the stuff the UNSC issues. He has grenades. He can decide to just dig a foxhole and wait for the Federation guy to come to him, or set out like mines or something if they. The UNSC has anti-personnel and anti-tank mines. I'm fuzzy as to the distribution of how they give those out. Mm-hmm. They might be more akin to like special issue ordnance they only give people if they're going to need or use them. But if the guy has them, he can set those out, which...
Well, I assume a fire team would at least have a couple.
I have no idea how a modern military fire team distributes and equips themselves with grenades, and that's also why I'm not bringing in stuff like the bubble shield or other specialist equipment, because it exists, and I have no idea how common or distributed it is throughout the UNSC. So,
but it's not standard issue for one-on-one infantry. I get you.
I'm not even sure if it's standard issue for platoon issue. All I know is they have it, and if they wanted to, they could give it to somebody. Probably, maybe, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But so I would arguably say the UNSC, because of stuff like he can dig a foxhole or knows what a foxhole is.
I'm sure Starfleet could make a foxhole with a phaser.
Yeah, well then you have no power in your phaser, so then you're like, I hope that guy's really good with his knife. Oh wait, no, he doesn't have a knife. He's screwed. But the UNSC I think would excel at the defense because they have the equipment to mount a defense, and I mean they can take the offensive, but it's more difficult for them, especially as things get larger, because they have to stay within transporter jamming range and all this other stuff that the Federation does not necessarily have to deal with. And also, on average, their grunts will have less information than their Federation counterparts. But their Federation counterparts don't really have the training and the aggression to use that. Like, I don't think the Federation does the Marine Corps thing where they give everyone bayonets and have them go stab bayonet target dummies while screaming loudly or whatever. Just to train aggression.
I don't think
they probably don't do that. So there's a certain lack of instilling that mindset of aggression, which... But on the other hand, in a one-on-one fight, it's going to be a matter of, who sees who's first, who gets the first shot off, and that kind of thing, where it doesn't necessarily, where a lot of the UNSC's advantages don't come into play at this level. So, I would say the
Okay.
UNSC has the edge, but it's like a 7 out of 10 wins thing, not like just a curb stomp.
Yeah. I think where it comes down to is what sort of situation they find themselves in. I think where Starfleet's advantages, for, at least for the average ground trooper, is more access to information. We're sort of discounting mobilization here.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, they're both
yeah.
using. We could have a debate on like their transport means, but it's going to be well, UNSC boots have these ridges, which I think in this study says they're better. It's going to be like
Yeah.
they're probably not going to be running around here long enough to get like boot blisters or whatever comes when you're running around through the woods for days on end or whatever.
Yeah. Starfleet's main advantage here is information and energy. Energy being what their weapon can actually produce, not
Yeah.
necessarily how well it delivers it, but his weapon is more powerful. If he gets a hit, that dude is dead. Even if it's
Maybe.
glancing blow on his limb.
If he sets it to max power, if he
Well,
knows all he if he knows all he has to do is kill the other guy and we win, sure. I think for the average engagement, they're probably not going to walk around with their weapons set to setting 16, hoping to get that lucky shot off.
Well, setting 16 is vaporization. I'm talking
Okay,
about
setting
like, the typical Trek hit and the guy dies.
Well, yeah,
I
will point out it's not guaranteed that kills him because of the armor, which is one of those things that it's probable, but then it's probable if the Federation guy catches a bullet to the chest, he will die.
Yeah, well,
Much more
I would think
actually.
that in this case, he would have adjusted the phaser slightly up to account for the armor. So it's not like setting like 16, or even like setting 12. It's maybe like setting 8.
Maybe.
I think there's a way to compensate for it. That's not to say it's guaranteed. If he catches it at a poor angle, then obviously the guy has a much stronger chance. Or if it's a particularly thicker area than the phaser's used to hitting.
Yeah.
I think the real issue doesn't come down to. It comes down to, I think, can Starfleet get the first shot? Because this is where I see the flaw. He has the information. He has enough strength his weapon has enough strength to kill the guy if he lands a solid hit, I think. His best chance.
I'm not arguing that he'll just tank it on the armor and be fine.
I'm
arguing it is not a guarantee. Where it is much more likely that if the Federation guy catches a burst of gunfire, he will be much more likely to be killed or incapacitated.
Oh yeah. No, I agree. Like I said, there's different methods of effectiveness of delivering that energy. So I think in this case, the Starfleet officer's best chance is basically assuming he knows about the motion sensor, which there's a good chance he doesn't. If he knows about the motion sensor, his best chance is to find a place to hunker down this guy's path, or just outside his sensor range, and then try and take a shot at him.
I would point out that's the level. That's the exact. He has a motion tracker with range X, or just he has a motion tracker thing. That's the kind of range where I'm going to argue that the I'll just wait until it's dark level of tactical knowledge comes into play.
That's fair. Failing that, his best chance is to set up an ambush that favors himself.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If there is favorable terrain, the Federation guy has the sensors to find it.
Yeah.
It's just if he will necessarily be able to exploit it.
But, right. I think even if it doesn't come down to him killing the UNSC officer early on, the UNSC troop early on, it quickly switches sides as to who's the combat is favorable to, because you switch from where the Starfleet has the advantage, which is information, which is he uses to exploit, getting in a good position, maybe getting off the first shot, maybe getting off from a better angle. And, power, the shot's likely to kill or likely to badly wound him compared to what a bullet might do. Then you you get out of there into where the UNSC soldier excels. Greater aggression, greater instinct, more likely to have a lot more experience in these sort of firefights.
It's probable he has training on what to do if he's ambushed by an enemy in this position and like how to counter that ambush. The Federation guy, maybe not.
I think the Federation guy has the training. He doesn't have the experience, because there's a difference between being taught what to do when you're being shot at and having actually been shot at.
That's true. I mean, if we're assuming an equal, are we assuming like an equal level of experience, or like just like the average?
The average experience to their group. So I think the UNSC soldier has more experience. I think that's where they excel in. Where Starfleet, maybe somebody's taken a pot shot at them once or twice, but I doubt it was a professional.
Yeah, or like you got called by the captain to help rescue some hostages, and you did that, and then you just went back to being a security guard or whatever.
Yeah. Now, so I think that disappears if we get like an experienced veteran, like O'Brien, or like someone who was on the front lines in like against the Jem'Hadar. Then I think it shifts. I think it's more 50-50 then.
Against an equally veteran UNSC soldier?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be tricky, because I would argue... I don't like talking about specific veteran stuff, because that's where we start getting into a lot of luck and whatnot.
Well, you would get into luck. I'm saying what favors them. And I would still say that the UNSC soldier has some advantages depending on his loadout. He has a lot more variety in how quickly he can change his battle technique.
Yeah.
A Starfleet soldier, he can turn his like phaser into a rocket launcher. It's effectively, or a stun gun, or even a wide beam setting, but it takes time, and in a firefight, that's not necessarily a good thing. Once the fighting starts, I think that advantage shifts to the UNSC soldier, who can lob a grenade, who's likely to have grenades, use maybe one or two different weapons he has access to.
Yeah.
All
right.
Or even a knife.
Yeah.
If it comes down to it. Or, if it really goes to shit and they're out there in the dark, and the UNSC soldier is like hiding in like a swamp. I mean, not the UNSC soldier, the Starfleet soldier is hiding in a swamp staring at his tricorder, desperately hoping the guy's not coming toward him.
Yeah. Okay, so in that case, then we move up to the... You say
ODS.
Fire teams and squads. Do you mean like a fire team? Or because I do not know. I believe a fire team is just like half a squad, or like a fire team is the same thing as a squad. I'm fuzzy on the exact difference here.
Okay, so you have a battle team, which is the smallest unit, which is I think 2 to 3 men. Then you have a fire team, which is 4 to 6 men, and a squad is 2 to 3 of those, which is we'll use 2. So that's like, what is that? 12 to 8 to 12 men.
Okay, well, see, I would argue that at the fire team and squad level, this is where things really swing to the UNSC, as opposed to being kind of as not made like with the individual. It was either a strong advantage or a disadvantage, but very random. With fire teams and squads, in whatever terrain, I think the advantage is going to be more towards the UNSC, because yes, the Federation has, now they have their Worf Zuka guy with them, but the UNSC has way more experience and capability in fighting through any terrain imaginable in a unit, and has probably better developed tactics for doing that, and much more and I don't know. This is playing to most of the UNSC's strengths, where the Federation doesn't really get anything to help them at this point. Whereas the UNSC does, because now the UNSC has way more you can pin them down while your buddy flanks them with a grenade, or
Right.
you can use all these other tactics that a lone soldier can't do. And also, it's going to last long. The battle will last longer, and it might get dark. That night vision thing is just going to screw them over the minute the UNSC figures it out.
The thing is, as soon as they figure it out and start using it, then Starfleet's gonna go, maybe we should make some night vision goggles. Let's head down to the replicators.
Yeah, like those guys on AR-558. They had with their night vision. Oh wait. Yeah, I just say that one episode really hurts Star Trek when it comes to any sort of ground engagement.
Really?
See, the problem is because it says it undermines they just have this gizmo from this episode because you see them here in this episode and they don't have that gizmo. But in any case, fundamentally the advantage is the UNSC. They can fight okay one-on-one, but that's what they're supposed to do. They're soldiers who fight in squads and execute maneuvers and, flank things and tactical and enfilade and all that other soldier stuff. And that's what they do. The Federation doesn't necessarily have the experience or capability or tactics and weapons to do that as well.
I would disagree to some extent. I think what we would actually see is your sound on?
No. Can you hear me?
No, but I'm hearing myself. Let me check, make sure
This stream setup is like a kludgy abomination that I will never speak of how we actually got this working out of embarrassment, because...
Fair enough. Anyways, I think rather you're going to see... I think you're going to see the differences between them grow larger. Because, as I mentioned, because when you go from like one person to an entire fire team, which is between like 4 to 6 people. Yeah, between 4 and 6. Then the power that the capabilities that they have also vastly increases. And you made this great point with the UNSC. In fact, the UNSC probably takes advantage of it more. You can have a guy with a rocket launcher. You can have a guy with a mortar. You can have a guy with different grenades or different guns, or even a sniper rifle. Starfleet doesn't have the same variety in terms of hardware, but what hardware they do have is far more adjustable. So a phaser rifle, for example, you can have, for example, if you just split up the fire team into 2 battle teams, if you had, say, one of the UNC battle teams pinned down, but you couldn't quite get to them, you could have your other Federation battle team, assuming they were free.
I'm losing you here. Your stream's frozen.
Having...
the stream lagged there for a second. I lost you. I lost you to something just at the... if you have a UNSC battle team pinned down and a free Federation battle team, you can have them something.
Okay, you can have the Starfleet officers adjust their phasers to whatever setting you need them to damage their cover or force them out. It makes each officer on the Starfleet team can easily become a rocket launcher dude, or he can set it to a wide beam, like I said before. Now, this isn't as easy as it sounds, because with equal numbers, it's going to make it hard.
Well, see, the issue I have with that is, I mean, yes, if you have an enemy pinned down and a free element to flank them, you can mess them up as pretty basic infantry.
Yeah, that's true.
The problem is the UNSC has way better odds of pinning people down with, say, a saw, or I think they actually do just call it a squad automatic weapon, or just with their rifles, than a similar automatic Federation team does, and then hitting them with grenades or whatever weapon it is they need. So it's not like the Federation Sure, the Federation gains anything from being able to employ squad tactics, but the UNSC is better at them and has the tools that are not just, yes, you can adjust a phaser rifle to be a kind of rocket launcher. The UNSC has an actual rocket launcher.
True,
so there's a
but there's
certain
one
level of.
rocket launcher for a fire team generally, probably.
I mean,
And
the other thing is, like, we don't see Federation squads flanking people with wide beam fire and then calling in a strike from another squad flanking them. So, I mean, yes, they could, and we probably just maybe seen them on an off day.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the overall level of competence and tactical capability of the average Federation squad is lesser than the average UNSC squad, simply because the Federation guys are, security guys who deal with the odd rebellion or whatever. This actual infantry level war squad stuff is what the UNSC does.
No, I get that. Again, I think this sort of goes into the information and power issue with Starfleet for your average security force. They're probably going to determine where they fight on Starfleet side, so they're probably going to have an advantage. They're going to have an advantage in terms of phaser rifles being more powerful. So, and whether or not that's them cranking it up higher or not is not necessarily the point, but it is there for them. I think when it breaks down, when they hit, when it gets into the chaotic area, that's when the UNSC is going to have the advantage because they know how to react when things go to shit.
Yeah.
Starfleet is used to getting in there, hitting hard, and then pulling out. At least that's what I've garnered from their tactics. So if you have a fire team, the UFP's greatest strength is going to be the initial strike. If you can survive the initial strike with your combat force relatively intact, you can probably force the Starfleet officers to retreat or take them out entirely or inflict heavy casualties. I think where Starfleet has the advantage is if you're in a sort of stalemate position, they can probably turn it on you because they have more access to information, and their weapons are more adjustable to what they can do individually as far as their rifles go. Now, where the UNSC's advantage, I think, comes in is, as you said, their experience. If they survive that initial strike, which is more likely than I think some people give them credit for, because unless of course, like, they're just getting ambushed, and usually with an ambush, regardless of who you are, you're fucked.
Yeah, ambushes are tricky.
Yeah, which the thing is that Starfleet's whole thing is probably ambushing, getting the drop on them.
Yeah. I think, though, the other problem would be that I think you're giving a little bit too much credit to rifle hitting power and not necessarily to, just like with the power and lethality. Like, yes, it's good for Starfleet that they can being able to fire a shot that's almost certain to kill, to score a kill is great.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, again, the UNSC can do that too, and they have like an assault rifle that can do that 15 times a second. And the Starfleet officers having slightly more power per shot is less useful than having vastly more shots of marginally less power. And especially because, like, when you talk about rifle adjustability, like, okay, you can have a really high-powered shot or just a rifle. And that's useful, but that also starts pointing, like, this is the part where the UNSC is going to have, a designated marksman with a designated marksman rifle or a sniper rifle. And lots of stuff that the Federation does not necessarily have an answer to, aside from cross your fingers and hope setting 16 works. And again, I think we've seen a lot of firefights on Star Trek, and it doesn't tend to involve a lot of people maneuvering around to try and get that one setting 16 super volley off and kill everyone.
Oh
It's
no,
a
no,
lot
no.
of pick people off through light exchanges of fire and then move on. Where I, I understand that Starfleet. I think you're describing tactics that Starfleet could adopt after a while. The problem is the UNSC would also adapt different tactics, and so you would start seeing.
Well, you'll see a shift on both sides as
Yeah,
they adapt
well,
to
see,
each other.
I think you're giving the Federation like a tactical playbook that they would not necessarily be using at the start of, hey, we're fighting some guys with like some kind of body armor and bullets stage
Oh,
of knowledge.
I don't think they're going to immediately switch to setting 69. I think that would be a mistake. I think they're going to see that if their
Yeah.
shots are not
I would,
reliably killing their targets,
I would also
they are
note.
going.
Sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
also note you're saying rocket launcher, and that's not really what setting 16 does because rockets have collateral damage. It's a high level shot is going to kill a guy or break a thing. It's not going to be an area damage thing like a proper rocket is.
It probably actually would be if you remember from Insurrection when they blow a hole through that wall. Granted, they did use 3 phasers.
I think that's true. If we have a UNSC squad that's hiding behind a rock wall in this exact position, the average Star Trek firefight does
Or
not have lots of things just exploding all over everything.
well, that's true, but that's in part that's budgetary reasons, and I know that's not the favorite argument to go to.
It's difficult to argue.
Budget constraints. I know. I
Not
understand that.
necessarily that. I mean, again, I've my problem with the budget restraints argument is that it's the kind of thing
Convenient
that, in
argument.
my view, is used to erase weaknesses and not strengths. Like I think I mentioned before, this is PM. We both know that the reason Star Trek has a transporter is because they couldn't afford shuttle landing shots.
Right.
So if we argue
Yeah.
the no budget constraints version of Star Trek, they don't have transporters anymore because transporters are a budget restraint.
True.
There comes a point where you have to say, okay, the show is what it is, and I have to work on what I have, not on some idealized version that could exist. And I understand where you're coming from, and there's stuff about Star Trek that I will accept. I'm saying I'm not I'm not going to argue that yes, all their
Mm-hmm.
Starfleet security officers actually fight like just Hollywood extras who have a vague idea of what a gun is.
Mm-hmm.
They're not that bad, but I think I think the level of tactics you're suggesting they'll use does not match what we have seen them employ or what necessarily makes sense for how we've seen them use their weapons.
Well, my take on it is to sort of look at them and see what the actors are trying to do. And obviously, if the characters fail because of one thing or another, that's something we take into consider. But when I look at Starfleet, I see that they've taken on a very specialized, very narrow form of maneuver warfare, and that has its advantages and it has its weaknesses to the point
Yeah.
where their technology has supplanted much of the training and experience that we sort of come to expect from a modern soldier. So you have this quick hitting, lightning striking force that gets in, probably takes out the target in like a few shots because they've set up the ambush, they've rigged the entire environment to their advantage. And it's about information, it's about mobility, and it's about hitting power. When you get out of those areas, you start getting into attrition warfare, you start getting into chaos, you start getting into things where you can't quickly you can't plan your way through. That's when I think Starfleet cracks, and I think the show represents this. You have people who are only armed with phasers typically or a tricorder. They don't use grenades. They don't use heavy hitting stuff because they're more of a pacifying force. They deal with like maybe a couple small rebels that are completely outmatched, and occasionally they'll fight the Klingons, and that's always a hard fight for them. Or the Romulans, they'll fight a peer opponent occasionally, and that's usually more of a shock to their troops than you might otherwise expect it to be. And I agree that they don't just like go around like blasting at super high settings. but I think they'll do it when it makes sense. If like you have some guys hiding in a building and you can't get through, and you're just not getting through, it makes sense that one of them is going to set their phaser to a higher setting and then blast through.
Okay, yeah, that was not the impression I was getting from what you were saying before, but yeah, that makes a little more sense.
Okay. And I also think they'll keep their phasers on a sort of sweet spot for the kill setting. If you have someone who has like slightly better armor, where a normal, like let's say, kill setting is like 4 or 5,
Yeah.
they might go up to like 5 or 6 to get a reliable kill shot. Not necessarily enough to like blow a hole through them, but enough that you expect the person to die when you hit them. So it sort of negates the advantage that most armor might have. It doesn't mean the armor is useless. For example, it's useful against grenades and
or shrapnel from a nearby phaser blast or something, or you hit him at a wrong
exactly,
angle,
yeah.
or.
In fact, the armor
I think you're slightly
vastly
overestimating how easy it is to just adjust weapons to punch through armor because of stuff like the Eddington's barrel aided last stand thing. But I think you have a point in that no, like the Federation isn't going to be running around like idiots with their guns set to the usual kill setting and not trying to do something to deal with armor.
Yeah, armor definitely complicates things. Even like if you're shooting at someone and let's just say, for example, you expect a phaser shot to cut through like a certain thickness of wall, and like you see a guy running, he hides behind a wall, you shoot him, it might penetrate the wall and it might hurt him, but the armor might save his life. And in fact, when you set your phaser to 16, like say you blow up a wall, it might kill the guy directly behind the wall where your phaser blast hits, but the other guys in body armor might survive, or they might suffer less injuries. Simply because, well, survive, but simply because they have that armor. And like I said, then of course, if you have someone using the War Bazooka, that armor still comes in it has a great deal of utility. So yeah, I'm not arguing that we're just gonna like dial up all of our weapons to much higher where they just blow through targets. I think it's more situational. I think you're going to see mostly the usual kill setting. And that's why I argue that Starfleet's greatest advantages are its information, mobility, and its striking power. But once you pull them out of those core areas where they're strong, they're very, very weak.
Once you get them out of their comfort zone or engage them outside of their terms.
Yeah.
It's fair enough. So, and I guess because it is getting later, we should try and wrap this up with our last thing. So how do you think this applies when we get to like the platoon scale thing? Because this is the area where, at the very least, we know like Starfleet will have other transport options. Like they'll have hoppers, or the UNSC is going to start bringing their Pelicans in. And certainly the UNSC will now have stuff like drone reconnaissance and better ways of leveling the playing field for information. And the Federation, like I mentioned before, that their information is that they have very widely distributed information networks. The problem is it doesn't really get a lot better than tricorders, or like tricorders and an orbital scan. So
I think it sort of depends. If the platoon is able to mobilize with their transporters, the mobility and striking force is enough that it could probably collapse the UNSC before they even get going.
I'm questioning
if the UNSC is able to.
I'm not sure if it's hard to say because we don't have like a Starfleet table of organization equipment, but I don't think personal transporter pad stuff would be
No. I don't mean transporters. I think at the platoon level, when Starfleet mobilizes it around with like an actual dedicated transporter unit somewhere in the vicinity or an orbit or something like that, if that is on the table, the mobility that Starfleet would have would basically overwhelm the UNSC. They can't move fast enough. But the UNSC is not going to play that game. Once they learn the game, they're not going to play it.
Yeah, well, see, the problem I have with like the transporter and like moving stuff around is that with yes, you can try and get a squad into an ideal position, but they'll be detected very quickly, maybe even immediately. Like, I mean, if there's a drone with a thermal scanner on there, it's going to
Hmm.
notice a half dozen heat signatures popping in right above them, and it's going to set off a warning, and an AI is going to notice it and say, "Hey, look, there's a squad there," and then they're going to the Starfleet is going to finish beaming in, and they're going to eat a rocket to the face the minute they beam in.
I agree that the early warning systems are going to help the UNSC, but first the drone has to see them. The AI maybe will be very quick to notice and respond. But then the commander gets the information, and then he has to disseminate that information to everyone else.
Well, not
As soon,
necessarily. I mean, we've seen with we actually have seen like how UNSC commanders interface with AI on the tactical level with Silva and what was it, Wellington? The
yeah, I
AI
think
in
so.
First Strike, where there's a lot of, hey, there's a thing. And he's like, okay, tell the troops to counter the thing. And it's not that Silva has to personally call everyone up and say, hey, aim your rocket launcher here. Like, they'll get a notification
That's
or
true.
something. There's, yes, there will be a slow, it's not going to be an instantaneous command loop, but I think it's
Mhm.
going to be a fast enough command loop that transporters are not going to be necessarily effective or as effective as you're hoping they will be.
It's not. It's not that they won't be able to respond quickly. It's that there will be a delay between when they beam in and when he takes in the situation. For example, is he surrounded? Are they on one side? Are they on multiple fronts? Because he has to look at that information, then decide what to do, and by that time, they're already shooting. You may be able to. The UNSC can probably adapt really quickly, but just as quickly as they've hit, they can just pull out.
Yeah. That
And
said,
it's not
I
like
think
there's not a
you're
response to
I
it,
think
but
if we're assuming transport if we're assuming that at the platoon level they get
mhm.
transporters, it would seem reasonable to argue that at the platoon level they will get anti-transporter equipment to some degree.
Oh yeah, that's true. I would
So I
agree.
mean, the UNSC might have trouble advancing, but they will at least have like a no transporters safe zone that they
Yes.
can try and push out or maintain enough that they can get sufficient early warning to counter any transporter ambush. Because
Yeah, I
I think
agree.
fundamentally this is. I think that an issue with like Federation versus UNSC is not necessarily going to be, who has the better gun, but more who
Hmm.
has the better way of forcing the opponent to play by their rules, or forcing the opponent out of
Hmm.
their comfort zone. And
Right.
I think the UNSC's consistent advantage over that is going to be two things. They have a lot more tactical combat experience than the Federation does, and they have AIs who can really speed up the decision loop uh, or highlighting what information is relevant, where the Federation is still doing things at human speed. So, for example, like okay, like say with your example of like beaming guys in, our Federation guy notices there's a good spot to beam guys in and that there's a gap in the transporter coverage or however, and exploits that. The UNSC has, I think, a decent odds that their AI already knows about that gap and is watching it, and maybe even having a guy with a grenade launcher covering it just in case as they advance.
That's possible.
It's I would fundamentally not prefer the thing with transporters is I don't is transporters are difficult. Uh, they'll be an advantage
Hmm.
certainly, and I think they're I don't think they're necessarily going to be. I think I've in the past said that transporters are an advantage in the same way that having like a rocket on your arm so you can shove it into a meat grinder faster is an advantage. And I don't necessarily think that's true. That's that I think you're overestimating how powerful they are, especially because again we're getting into the point where at the platoon level you're starting to get into points where the UNSC has like dedicated heavy weapons teams, and they
Hmm.
absolutely will have sniper teams and guys with dedicated equipment and
Well,
all
I
of their
think.
good stuff.
Mhm.
The Federation's firepower caps at like the squad level or so. Like as a Federation fire team gets bigger, they don't get better weapons or more access to stuff and like it's just they have what they have. The UNSC, as you scale things up, they start getting more. They still get more stuff, because more specialists are attached and more units are employed. Like at this level, they do have grenades, and or not grenades. Like they will have mines. They will have guys with railgun sniper rifles and all sorts. Probably
Maybe
have guys with railgun sniper rifles, but they certainly have snipers. They have, or they have. I would say it is probable that they have stuff like warthogs with heavy weapons and a better recon capability, or even certainly not as good as transporters, but certainly better than guys on foot and probably better than shuttle as far as tactical movement goes.
It would depend on the shuttle type.
Well, I mean, I'm pointing is a shuttle is a shuttle is fast getting from point A to point B, but like with landing and unloading troops, and it tends to be used to transport only. You're not going to send a shuttle to pick up 5 guys. You can have a Warthog transport, a squad or two, or not a squad, like a fire team, to somewhere, and then support them with its gun.
Actually, not even a fire team. It'd be a battle team.
There is some debate on exactly how big of a force you can usually fit on a Warthog. In-game, it's driver, passenger, gunner. In the books, they'll frequently have another guy or two like hanging on, I guess, or they'll have one of the dedicated transport Warthogs.
There might be in the games, they might have just removed an entire seat. It would make sense if they had like another.
It's simplified to a degree because in the games, if you the AI is usually a decent shot, so if you pack more guys on a Warthog, it just becomes this unstoppable fire platform, at least against the AI. But the problem is that the Federation transporters are basically like when you jump from squad to platoon level, transporters are probably maybe the only thing they get. The UNSC gets a lot more stuff, and as you keep scaling up, the UNSC is going to get more stuff, and the Federation, I don't know, maybe they'll get like a fighter for ground support, maybe, but the problem I think you're overestimating how much the ability to move light infantry around is going to be valuable. So
I would say it's when you get to the platoon level, the advantage in terms of mobility for Starfleet is its ability to beam groups of people around the map. So they can, and in addition to that, the information that they bring, they won't just have a drone eye view of the area. Their tricorder will literally pick up, or even any dedicated sensor platform, such as a shuttle. They can easily pick up all the snipers. They'll pick up all the rocket infantries. They'll find almost everyone who isn't somehow shielded from their sensors.
I'll point out a drone with a thermal camera does pretty much the same thing.
True, but it has a more limited range of what it can see.
Okay, and note with the stream, it's not that we're not acknowledging the Argo buggy. It's just every Starfleet platoon does not have an Argo buggy, whereas it's reasonable that a lot of UNSC platoons will have Warthog or other attached assets.
I also don't really see the Argo buggy as a dedicated military platform. It was sort of a backup unit.
Yeah, and also
for an unfavorable environment where you couldn't use shuttlecraft.
I would not be surprised if there was this cut scene. If there was a scene that was cut where Worf was just welding a phaser onto the back of that, because it does not appear to be. Yes, Starfleet could use it in combat, but I don't think they do not normally use it in combat. But
no, it wouldn't make any sense when you compare it to like a skimmer or a hopper or just a shuttle. It's slower. It can only move in 2 dimensions unless you're falling.
Yeah,
which isn't exactly favorable. And a shuttle just tends to work better with their technology.
Yeah.
Maybe not as useful as moving people around on the ground is, but that's what they have transporters for. If they don't have transporters, chances are they're fucked.
Yeah. And I think the other I think the other issue with transporters specifically is that
Hmm.
I mean for our previous ones, like the one we won in the squads,
Hmm.
it's basically who can kill each other, and that's
Yeah.
plausible. I mean, that's more or less what would happen if you have like, just two soldiers in a battlefield all by themselves, or not plausible. They should be probably
Hmm.
running and trying to link up with their armies. But when you're talking about attached platoon level forces, like you don't just send a platoon out there to just go kill that enemy platoon. You send them there to accomplish an objective. And
Yes.
I think Starfleet's problem is that Starfleet can hinder a UNSC force from reaching an objective. I don't think they can stop them, and I don't think they can seize an objective from the UNSC. It's like transporter beaming teams are effectively it's a harassment tactic, but fighting from a
No, no,
fixed
I don't
position
agree.
or with weak points covered and with early warning systems, I don't think that's something you can easily use to storm a position, especially not once you get especially not
Well,
with
like an actual
jamming.
military base. No, I don't think they could just easily storm a military base. That
Well,
would take a dedicated assault.
really, if the UNSC has time to really dig in, survey the area, that's going to be harder to deploy because, like, okay, your squad beams in and then they set off a claymore the UNSC planted there an hour ago.
Assuming that they that they beam into a claymore. Claymore doesn't cover a very large area.
No,
It
but
could
like the
happen.
point is, they have to try and find uh, with the stream, I would note we don't. There's nothing to. There's no reason to think that industrial replicators are like platoon level equipment. I mean, Deep Space Nine was a significant starbase and had three of them.
Yeah.
That's not the kind of thing that every platoon in your army has.
No, no.
So,
Um, I think where this comes down to is a matter of context, and that's where the UNSC can do some things and it can't do other things. As far as a military base, where you can set up EM shields, or a forward base where you can set up strong enough EM emitters, that's Starfleet.
I will.
Starfleet can't just jump in and hit and then get out. That's when it becomes messy.
It's fuzzy if we're
I
talking
think.
about platoon level stuff because this isn't precisely defined. But like the UNSC has
Mhm.
the Gremlin. It's just an EMP cannon on the back of a truck. That seems like something you could pretty
Mhm.
easily adapt into a jamming platform.
Possibly,
But
yes. I don't know what the
the
range
point
on
I'm
that would be.
making more so is that you don't need a hardened military base. You need enough bases where you have like there's only so many places you can beam in, and there's only so
Hmm.
many of those places that are going to be advantages to beam in. The UNSC can the UNSC has
Granted.
can put heavy weapons emplacements to cover weak spots. They can plant mines. They can ensure that you can't just drop a platoon or a squad or something anywhere you want and not pay for it. Which is why I think the UNSC which is one of the big reasons why the UNSC has an advantage on defense that they don't necessarily have on offense is because on defense you have time, you have knowledge of the terrain to set up defenses and emplacements and make the and control how the battle plays out and the whole and as we mentioned before, this is fundamentally a battle of who can force the opponent to play by whose rules and you have to attack this thing I have is very much a and you have to do it the way I want you to kind of situation or it's like and see the thing is like with mines for example
Hmm.
the Federation can probably detect those and
Yes.
but you still can't beam your troops into a minefield
No, but you can beam the mines up.
and if mines are networked which I do not know if they are or not. I know certainly
Well,
some of
they
them
might
are
pick the
remote
energy surge from
detonating.
the
Hmm?
transporters. They still might pick up the energy signature from the transporters, especially it's after
There are
observing
still
it enough times.
the thing is like yes you can just beam up the mine but that might be noticed or
Mhm.
and again you'll
Granted.
still have stuff with there are going to be drones with cameras looking out for suddenly appearing heat signatures or the sound of a transporter. It is defense is not. I do not believe the Federation. I don't think just being able to get guys into position is going to be enough to overcome the kind of defense the UNSC can set up. And the problem is, offensively, the UNSC will be slow because, again, they have to deal with jamming and have to cover their back against transporters. But the Federation has, like, their little portable force shields that they can set up, and that's about it for defenses. Like, they're not going to set up mines. They're not going to place heavy weapons.
Can get portable shields can actually get much stronger. If you remember,
they have bigger. They have like the bigger ones. Yes, I think you said like a.
That was like a 50 gigawatt shield. You would need like a tactical nuke to bust through that. That was a.
Well, the other problem would be that just turns into a siege situation, and
true.
I mean, I think we mentioned they don't have rations, so.
They have but they probably have a replicator.
Yeah, they probably have a food replicator, but I think forcing people to eat replicated food for 3 days might work even faster than starving them. But
they would have a rations at base, though. They always have rations on like shuttles and bases and such. I think where the differences between these two is and where they excel is the UNSC excels at attrition compared to Starfleet. And they have a bit of an advantage here because they can do both maneuver warfare and attrition. Yeah. Starfleet is not very good at attrition warfare. I think when it comes to getting your troops in, hitting and getting them out, Starfleet's going to be good. And the UNSC is going to realize that they can't match it because of the transporters and the information warfare. Not information warfare, the level of information Starfleet can gather. So they're not going to play that game. Because that's just a lose something.
Well, I mean,
what they're going to do is they're going to take.
Fair, I think they can play that game to a point. I mean Starfleet's not going to have a good answer for a couple of drop pods dropping a squad of ODSTs on something they find important either, unless it's a shielded, but that's detectable. So,
or unless they shoot it down with in place phaser positions. But that's a little less common, unless it's a larger base.
Yeah, unless it's like a full-on military base, they're probably not going to have that kind of.
Unless the shuttle sees them coming and shoots them down, but
yes, but then we get into air defenses and that kind of thing. Which, this is part of the problem with saying stuff like drop pods is that drop pods necessitate you have a ship in orbit, and a ship in orbit is going to bring a whole new ball game to think,
and reliably be able to drop the pods down. Yeah, that's a fair point.
But I
think.
Sorry, you were saying.
I think what the UNSC is going to do is realize that they're much better at attrition warfare, and that Starfleet is not good at attrition warfare because they can't handle the chaos. They can't handle the sudden shifts in strategy. So I think what the UNSC is going to do is going to bring as much firepower to the field as they can, and they're going to want to fight those battles.
Yeah.
If they can't bring Starfleet into a battle of attrition, they're probably going to draw back rather than stay there and lose the forces.
Well, I mean,
Starfleet's.
Now, I'm good. Again, I'm not the best at it, but it's the problem with maneuver warfare is that Starfleet maneuver warfare usually requires more than just man-portable heavy weapons to pull off. Like,
true.
Starfleet can get a guy with a rocket launcher anywhere they want, within reason and some limits, and there's stuff you can mess with up, and that's good for them. That's very powerful. But that's not. But the ability to put a man with a rocket launcher anywhere you want is not going to work as a
fix-all.
No, it's going to help. It's going to mitigate losses or make things more costly. But you're fundamentally going to need more than just rocket launchers everywhere to win, and they can't always do that.
That's true, and it's not just rocket launchers. There's also mortar launchers with like small level tactical nukes, but that's more of Starfleet's answer to attrition warfare, or at least their limited response to it. Where essentially, if they need to hit something solid and hard, they might be able to use a couple of those mortar launches to soften it up. It's not necessarily ideal.
I'm leery of assuming they still have stuff from TOS in the TNG and later era. Like, it's possible they could build one, or like dig up replicator files.
It's very possible they can build one.
Yeah, but like, okay, you don't just wing it with a mortar. It's a really complicated piece of military equipment, which, again,
Yes.
as I alluded to earlier with like the ground support thing, you don't
It
just
would require specialists.
have a mortar. You have to learn how to use a mortar, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a complicated piece of military equipment that requires a lot of training, and
On a
that gets
holodeck.
to the area where again, like the UNSC has mortars and artillery, and they already know how to use it, and more importantly, they know how to counter it.
They do.
And see, the thing with mortars is mortars are small and light. It's not exact, and the UNSC fought an insurrection for years. It's not like the
Mm-hmm.
concept of sneaking a mortar in somewhere to shoot at people is a foreign idea to the UNSC. So
No, no, no.
they're the Starfleet is better at the sneak a mortar in to shoot at something trick, but
Mm-hmm.
they're not but it's not like that's. I don't think. I mean, again, like, fundamentally, the problem is you can't win a war just by sneaking mortars everywhere. You can't win a war just by sneaking rocket launchers. And I mean,
Well,
at the
that's
platoon
true.
level, maybe you can pull off a win here and there with that. But
Well, again, I think it goes back to context. If Starfleet's going to use a mortar, like let's say just the one from Arena, for the sake of argument, they're not going to use it to take out like a couple of guys. Well, okay, they technically did, but it was an act of desperation on Kirk's part. They even say, that's a bit close. It's a pretty powerful piece of ordnance. They'll use it to take out something that's hard and difficult to take out, like a tank formation maybe, or they'll use it to lay siege to maybe a military base, or maybe where someone's landing a Pelican if they really need to. That's the purpose of that mortar, is to drop a shitload of firepower onto one target.
okay,
That's their sort of like their almost like their heavy artillery, their heavy mobile artillery.
okay.
It is not an it's not an answer to it's not an answer to a tank or
Yeah.
even attacking a heavily fortified area.
Yeah.
Um,
And see, that's the problem is that the UNSC has an answer to a tank and a heavily fortified area, and they have platoon level stuff that can hit something like a mortar. I mean, they have mortars. I mean, weaker ones, but you can still mortar stuff, or you can call it, or have a Pelican hit it, or.
mm-hmm.
The problem is, again, as I
mortars
mentioned
have
before,
different
the issue
intentions.
is what? Sorry, what?
A UNSC mortar is a different animal. Its goal is to remove infantry. A Federation mortar, one of that strength, is generally used to like a heavy artillery piece.
Yes, true, and I'm not saying that it's it's just it's just a little mortar, but the thing is,
No.
you only need to hit it hard enough to kill a mortar. It's not like with heavy artillery, and especially with like UNSC artillery it's like a mobile self-propelled gun it's a self-propelled gun. You can't just hit that with just light stuff, and it gets hard. Again, like the issue is, assuming they still have those and they have a guy who can use it well, I mean, they can pull off a win in a battle, or they can stall an offensive. But ultimately, and I think we are getting a little bit away from from just a platoon level engagement here.
Yeah, we are. We're sort of drifting. It's a little hard because platoons are generally like part of a large scale battle.
Yeah, but like you can argue, like say, like sending a platoon to secure some objective or something, or holding a position. But
I think you hit it on the head earlier. Whoever can force the other to play by their rules is going to carry the battle. And I think, depending on the situation, the greater strategic position, but the greater strategic context, sometimes the UNSC is going to determine the rules. Sometimes it's going to be the Federation.
I can agree with that, but I'll just note that I think the UNSC will have a better odds of forcing it, just because the UNSC has a bigger toolbox. And again, like I mentioned before, like okay, once you get past like the platoon squad level, Starfleet just kind of stops doing new stuff. Once you do that on the UNSC side, they still get bigger stuff. Like you start getting air support or tanks and heavy
Well, you get
emplacements
air
and
support with the UFP too.
yes,
You
that's
do
true.
get shuttles, and you do have fighters, and occasionally you do get ships. Which I
Yeah,
know the UNSC also gets ships.
I'm kind of assuming that for all intents and purposes, captures are a different thing because
Okay, that's fair.
once we start having the space battle, that just becomes whoever wins the orbitals
Yeah.
can then just bombard the other side until they quit.
I don't actually
Mostly,
believe that, but yeah, you do make a good point.
it is significant. Okay, a ship is like a ship is basically a force multiplier enough that it becomes very hard to play the game on
I
your
agree with
terms.
that. I agree with
But
that.
okay, let's like yes, Starfleet. I'll argue that they have air support. They have the capability to develop air support, but they don't have a
Well, they do
doctrine
have
in
it.
place to do that already. And I think it's
We
iffy
don't
how
know that.
suitable their gear is for it. Like, okay, they have a shuttle that can do a strafing run. The UNSC
Yes.
has that, or has an equivalent to that, and they have like a
Mhm.
lighter attack helicopter. They have Hornets. They can do just like very light stuff. They have a Pelican that's been converted into like basically an AC-130. They can fire artillery at ground forces, and the
Oh, you're right.
Federation.
They do have very specialized units that are very good at doing what they're
Yeah,
doing.
the Federation doesn't really have that, and more importantly,
Mhm.
the Federation has air support. The UNSC has air support, and they have both the means to use it and the means to block enemy air support because they have
Well,
anti.
so does the Federation.
Yes and no. The Federation has like their own fighters, but the UNSC has fighters and they have ground based AA. And again,
Well, Starfleet has fighters too.
but yeah, yes, but it's going. The problem is, it's they're attacking an enemy who has fighters or
Hmm.
who can only defend from the air is very different from attacking an enemy who can defend from the air and from the ground. And because I don't know, it's getting late, sir.
It is, yeah.
Yeah,
We're pushing past it.
we
Um,
I think we've given. I think we've made a lot of our best arguments. We've made a lot of points. Are there any kind of final points you want to make?
uh, let's see. Um, yeah, I think. Well, let's just sum up our position on it.
Okay.
All right, I think the UNSC's main advantage, at least when compared to the Federation, is experience, a variety of gear, as you mentioned, and the ability to employ that very quickly. The ability to take advantage of the chaos of a battlefield, the advantage of attritional warfare. A lot of heavy war machines, not always useful, I think, but it is there and it can bring a lot of firepower to bear.
Yeah.
And of course, we haven't even brought in the Spartans, but
Well, see,
otherwise,
the
that'd be a
problem with
whole.
the
I think
Spartans,
that's a whole.
yeah, the Spartans are really their own debate, and the
Yeah,
Spartans
that's
are.
the issue.
I kind of view them in terms of. I think it's what's his name? It's be like Wyzilla, who's brought up Space Marines with 40K. Spartans are like
Mm-hmm.
the ultimate "I win" button in like a tactical level engagement, but you have to use them
Yes.
very carefully to turn those tactical engagements into strategic successes.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they're a useful force multiplier, but they're not something that comes up on average. I mean, there's 30 of them. The average
I,
UNSC soldier is going to know Spartans exist, and that's it.
well, didn't they increase? Oh, that's
That's the
later.
Halo 4 era, and this is like Human
Yeah,
Covenant War era.
that's
So,
good point. Was there only 30 of them?
33 or 32 ish, because some of them were technically dead, and then they brought them
Right.
back because of and or like were said to be dead but were actually alive, and then I think at this point there was a definitive statement on the number of Spartans, but then
Mm.
don't
They
ask.
changed it.
It's a complicated,
Okay, fair
messy
enough.
thing.
Fair
It's
enough.
like trying to think of a good example here. What's an isoton in Star Trek mean? Like what's the equivalent yield of that? Because
Based off of hard cannon, you can't figure it out.
exactly,
Yeah, soft
Spartans are the
cannon.
isotons of Halo canon.
I can. Fair enough. Um, if we include a Spartan in the mix, I think that would shift up as far as mobility and whatnot. In fact, I think they'd be a greater force multiplier there. But setting that aside, because I don't want another long debate on that
No,
today.
we've been at this for 4 hours already.
Yeah. Um, I think where Starfleet excels is its ability to gain information, its ability to mobilize, and its initial striking power. Even if that striking power is not necessarily in terms of like heavy ordnance for the most part, it's just like small, precise. I think that's where they're suited for it. And if you pull them out of there, that's when they have trouble. But if they can stay in there, they do great.
Okay.
Of course, the downside is that the lower experience means that if the UNSC can survive the initial strikes, they can usually hit back really, really hard.
Okay. Now, in my
All right.
view, I mean, I think you raise a lot of good points, but you tend to overestimate Starfleet's chances or underestimate the UNSC. Like, in my view,
Mm-hmm.
the UNSC doesn't just have a lot more gear. They have a lot more gear that plays very specifically to weaknesses the Federation has and either can't patch or won't patch. Like, again, something very simple night vision. UNSC forces fighting at night will be vastly more effective than anything the Federation has, and the Federation could address that weakness, but for some unfathomable reason hasn't. And that's
I
kind
would
of
know
the issue.
to some extent they have addressed that. If is in that if you have a tricorder, you can probably avoid the guy with night vision. But you're right. If you get into a fight with him, you're fucked.
Yeah, if you can avoid the guy with night vision, you can avoid him. If the guy with night
Mm-hmm.
vision finds you or can force an engagement, or you can't avoid him because you're trying to defend something, then you have a bad time.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
So, and fundamentally, the UNSC not only has that gear, they have a well-developed doctrine for using that gear and experience with using it in any conceivable role: attacking and defending, strategic warfare, tactical engagements, maneuver warfare, attrition warfare, whatever it is. The UNSC has it, and they have a playbook on how to use it, and they have an AI standing there ready to tell you that playbook and say, hey, this is what we should do, or I suggest this, or, oh, hey, look, there's a weak spot I've found here. That the Federation doesn't really have an answer to that kind of high level strategic coordination. At least not during the beginning of a war,
Mm-hmm.
as both sides are trying to figure things out. And they'll adapt, but the UNSC is
Yeah.
always starting from the superior position of already having all this stuff and already having all this equipment and tactics and abilities that they know how to use and know how to use in concert. The Federation is always playing catch up, and it's very difficult to not just play catch up, but play catch up and then overtake someone
Mm-hmm.
who's already in a equipment-wise superior position. And the Federation has its own capabilities that the UNSC will have to try and counter, like stuff with transporters. But the problem is the UNSC has demonstrated that it will try and counter that stuff, and moreover, the Federation has a lot fewer things it has to learn how to figure out how to stop. And as it's been said several times, it's about forcing the opponent to play by your rules, and the UNSC has a lot more levers and crowbars to force their opponent to do something, and the Federation. I'm trying to come up with a good analogy here. Like, I can't come up with something because it's late.
Yeah. I think we
I
covered
think
the
we've
base.
both made our points, and we've had a
Yeah.
pretty civil discussion, and I've had fun. It's been a while since I've talked this much and this long about Star Trek to this level of detail, so.
Yeah. It was better than most of our debates online.
Uh, I think so. I think partly that's because there's certainly a more incentive to be civil in those. Not that we were ever that bad, but
No.
I think I can stop the stream here and wish you good night.
All right. Good night.